Notre Dame fans, welcome to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll, as you can see right there, joined today by Ryan Roberts, our recruiting director at irishbreakdown.com, and we are here today to cover the pending commitment of Preston Zinter to somebody, whether it's going to be Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. He's got a very impressive offer list, Ryan. He is going to make his decision known today. And we're going to have a lot to say about it one way or the other. If he picks Notre Dame, we'll discuss why. We'll discuss the backstory, how he fits, all those kind of things. And if he doesn't pick Notre Dame, we'll talk about kind of what's next at linebacker. So we'll have all those things. And, of course, he is going to be making a live announcement here very soon. When he starts to go to that, we will go live to it as well. So be ready for that. And then after he makes his announcements, we'll dive into it. But this is an interesting one, Ryan, because – and we'll just kind of lead up until they start talking about it. But this is actually looks like they're kind of getting ready to go to it. So let's pull that up. Everybody let me know. Let me turn the sound on here. And y'all let me know if you can hear.
215 pounds. He's a four-star.
Can everybody hear that?
He plays out of Central Catholic, according to our partners at 24/7 Sports. In terms of his statistics, Zinter is ranked at number 329 overall in America per the composite rankings. Zinter is listed as an athlete.
Can everybody hear that?
Size and skill is projected to play linebacker at the next level, but could play at a variety of positions. Listed as an athlete, he's the number 27 overall due to his impressive abilities on both sides of the ball. He's the number 4 ranked prospect in Massachusetts for this cycle. And we're now happy to welcome in Preston Zinter as he gets set to announce where he will play his college football. Welcome to CBS Sports HQ, Preston. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so you had over 20 scholarship offers from some of the biggest schools in college football, a lot of big schools in the Big Ten, as it turns out. How difficult was this decision for you?
It was definitely great to make the decision, but at the end of the day, you can only go to one school. So, I had a ton of great opportunities and kind of a ton of great places where I could have gone. Very difficult decision to make at the end of the day, but I'm happy with where I'm going to go.
There with your sister and your parents. When assessing all these schools and these programs, Preston, what were the factors that you were looking at specifically?
Just big time football, great academics, really great sense of brotherhood within the team, and just somewhere where I can just grow as a person, then just grow on and off the field as well.
And certainly getting some experience as to what it is like. Your brother is a starter on the offensive line at Michigan, so you know about this process, having seen him go through it. How did that prepare you for this decision?
It definitely helped seeing my brother go through it. He gave me a lot of great tips and pointers of what I should and shouldn't do. So, it's great to have that person to look up to.
And I guess that's your brother down there on the bottom left on FaceTime joining us. So he's part of this too. The whole family's in on it. Preston, in reading about the reports about your game, the same adjectives all come up: physical, athletic, tough. How do you classify your game?
I think you just said it all right there. I have a great work ethic, great leadership. So, every down I'm going 110% and never going to quit.
Is there a guy at the next level that you look up to or try to emulate other than your brother?
I would say.
Oh, we lost you there. We lost you. Lost your audio there,
but he did answer your question.
You're on mute, Brian. I know. I was so disappointed.
So I'm sitting there thinking, what did I do wrong?
I was like, did his iPad die or something? What's happening?
I know, right? I thought I did something wrong. I said, "Oh crap! Did I turn the sound off?" So we'll take that down. We'll go back to that here in a second. Obviously, this is an interesting one because he was kind of on the radar. He was a guy the staff liked. He was a guy that they had offered a while ago. They offered him back in the fall, I believe. And he was just one of several guys, and they're obviously offered Ryan, they went through a stretch where it's like you were doing a new offer story every day, it seemed,
and linebacker too,
exactly. Yeah. And then he visits for the January 29th date, and And for whatever reason, so something happened during that time that when he left that, Notre Dame had immediately said, okay, we're not taking this kid, and that's the kid we want. So clearly he showed up bigger than they thought, or longer than the last time they saw him, or something changed. They had a chance to really dive into the junior film and realize, look, this is a kid that we want, and they pushed for him. Now, obviously we'll see kind of, what decision he makes, but it is interesting to see kind of how that changed, because it looked like they were going to be real patient at linebacker. And then after that, Notre Dame was kind of like, we're going to ramp it up, because it what also comes out is, Phil Picciotti, who I know the staff likes a lot. Somebody down there said, the staff cooled on Phil Picciotti. No, they didn't. This is more about them heating up on Preston Zinter. Now, obviously how things go today is going to determine what's going on. And I thought we would already have the decision by now, but technical difficulty. See, it's not just us. It's not just me that has technical difficulties, but this one heated up real quick, right?
It did. No, it escalated very quickly. I know, people kept asking who's the next potential commit, right? And we were kind of putting some names out there, and the last time I talked to Preston, it was kind of like, I'm going to take my time with this, because he was last time we spoke a couple weeks ago. It was at the point where he was just like, man, last 2 weeks I've had 20 schools come in and out of Central Catholic. He felt a little overwhelmed. Obviously, he was getting ready for the junior day visit. He went on the junior day visit. That went fantastic. And like you said, for whatever reason, at that point, it was kind of like, okay, this is the guy for Notre Dame that they're going to make a big push, and we'll see if they can finish it off here. But it's a really interesting conversation too, Brian. I know we'll get more into the position stuff if he does decide to come to Notre Dame and where he would fit there. But I mean, just from a recruiting standpoint, this is a young man that's been recruited as a tight end by some programs, on defense at linebacker, and I wouldn't be surprised if some schools maybe even kick the tires with him playing weak side defensive end. I think that he can do that because he does that for his school already. They play a 3-4 system where he's basically an on-ball linebacker at times. So, I mean, you could project him to so many different spots, and I think that's the fascinating thing about his recruitment is that there was a lot of schools that had different perspectives on him, different projections for him, and had maybe different outlooks for what he could be for their school, which I think makes it interesting.
And it's so clear that for years, and it seems to be really amping up with Marcus Freeman. And we saw here we go. All right, let's get back to this. So let's see if it works this time.
Schools would love to have him. We'll find out the decision next on HQ.
They're always they drag this stuff out. So they're now going to commercials. So they couldn't have done that while he was
having technical difficulties. Yeah,
man, come on now.
It's pretty cool, man. That the age of technology, though, and it's pretty neat that he was able to have Zach, his brother, the starting offensive line from Michigan, be able to FaceTime during it too, though, man. That's pretty neat.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. You talk about him being a potential edge player is what we were discussing too, and then we kind of got into sort of a bit of a different kind of a different topic that kind of fits him is the one thing that's unique about him and about what we've seen from recruiting at Notre Dame for several years now. And this is something that Brian Kelly was into that I think has really ramped up in recent years, especially this past year with Marcus Freeman, is a lot of the kids that played for Notre Dame that Notre Dame recruited on defense last year were two-way players. Right. You look at Jalen Sneed played quarterback, and you look at Josh Burnham played quarterback. Nolan Ziegler played receiver. You look at Benjamin Morrison was a two-way player. Jaden Mickey was not, because he comes from an area where it's just you don't have as many of the two-way guys. Jaden Bellamy was a two-way player, and obviously it's a situation where this is a kid that fits that mold, right? This is just a football player, right? And that's kind of what Notre Dame was looking for, and he kind of fits that mold. So that part of it kind of understands, because like you said, it's not just about he plays two ways, but this is a kid that could play both sides of the ball in college to some degree. Yeah. Now, I think defense is where his best position is, but there's no doubt that he could help at that other position, in my opinion.
Right. Well, and I think that the flexibility from even the recruit in the 2023 class of the commits that Notre Dame has so far. You talk about, Drake Bowen's obviously not going to play running back on the next level, but he's a damn good high school running back, right? And
right.
Cooper Flanagan, who we just broke down, was playing defensive end and tight end for De La Salle. So
right.
I think it kind of extends to the sense of when you're the best athlete or wherever you are, you excel at everything. That's why I always love multi-sport athletes. They're always kind of the best of what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, we were getting into an era that I didn't like, to be completely honest with you, of more and more specialists. Mm-hmm. And I don't love that. I really don't. I think it's important to have guys that play football, because I think there's things that you learn, and we're seeing more and more of that from them. So, hey Ryan, you don't have happen to have a second monitor, by the way, do you? Because there's some looks like there's some technical difficulties with CBS Sports right now that it's a little behind. So I was going to see if it might just be me or what the situation is, but it keeps freezing up. Everything else that I have going on is working fine, it seems, but for whatever reason, that one is not working fine. So, we're gonna have to find out kind of how that goes. But I want to address something real quick that was in the chat that's off of this as we kind of wait for this. First of all, we are not going to have a mailbag stream. When we are done talking about Preston, we are going to then just go into the mailbag. So keep it in mind, everybody. David Solomon says, he is in Notre Dame, haven't had a defensive lineman like Bryant Young in a long time. We need to take a D tackle of his caliber every year. Bryant Young's a Hall of Famer and a legendary player. Nobody signs a guy of his caliber every year. I mean, there's not a D tackle of his caliber in college football right now. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, look, I think improving defensive line recruiting can always continue, but I think if that's your bar, you're going to be sadly disappointed with Notre Dame's recruiting classes for the rest of eternity. Because I don't know if I've ever saw Notre Dame pick up a kid where I'm like, that guy's going to be a Hall of Famer. I mean, that's a really far down projection, but that's why Hall of Famers are what they are, right? Like, say, well, we need to go find ourselves an Aaron Donald. So was 31 NFL football teams,
right?
You know what I mean? Like, there isn't anybody like Aaron Donald. That's what makes Aaron Donald Aaron Donald. So, just kind of try to keep that in mind.
Yeah. I mean, you put in a couple names in the chat, I think, earlier, right? Like, I mean, Notre Dame has still had Stephon Tuitt and Jerry Tillery.
Somebody else
still
put that
pretty
in there.
good.
Yeah. I mean, Jerry Tiller's a first-round NFL draft pick. I mean, so here we go. All right, let's get it. He's committed to Notre Dame. For whatever reason, the stream was not working, but you could hear the audio. So he did commit to Notre Dame. Preston Zinter has committed to the University of Notre Dame. He is now a commitment. Ryan, go ahead and talk about Preston Zinter's game.
Yeah. So like I was kind of illustrating before we started, so in the system that he plays in a 3-4 where they put him as an outside linebacker and they let him rush a lot. They play him in space a ton for Notre Dame. And he's also recruited heavily as a tight end on the other side of the ball by a few programs. For Notre Dame, they like him as a Mike linebacker and even possibly maybe a Will potentially. But they like him at Mike because they think that he brings a lot of physicality. He has the length. He's 6'3". Looks like he has pretty good arm length. He is a good athlete overall. And he's, he's one of those guys that can kind of do a bunch of different things. And when I talked to his coach, Chuck Apolopoulos, who has been there for 38 years, and we'll have an article about kind of that conversation with Coach here pretty soon. He talked a lot about not only the character of the young man, but just the fact that he thinks that he can do so much on the next level. Like I was talking to him about, Notre Dame likes him at Mike, likes him potentially at Will as well. And he's like, yeah, he could play defensive end. He could play tight end. Like he can do a little bit of everything. So Notre Dame does like him at Mike because he brings that physicality, he brings that length, good athlete. And then maybe potentially Will, depending on how everything shakes out. So he is a very talented football player. I'm excited to get him for Notre Dame to get him a part of this class with Drake Bowen, because I think when we talk about that fit, I think that those guys fit really well together as well. So good get for Notre Dame.
I'm just impressed that you could say that coach's name that easily. I mean, that just kind of rolled off like, I mean, wow, that was impressive, Ryan. I kind of stopped paying attention to your analysis after that. Like, man, it just nailed that. So
Adamopoulos, man, it's a good name.
He is, and let's give a little backstory to this. We kind of got into it a little bit at the beginning. Is, I think this is an interesting recruitment because this is not a guy that I think a month ago the Notre Dame staff would have thought, yeah, we're gonna make a really hard push for this kid. Right. I think they were still sorting out their board, and there's still a lot of guys they like. I think they're going to take at least 3 linebackers in this class. They'll take a fourth if it's a guy that can play, like legitimately play multiple positions. I don't think Zinter would count as that guy. I'm talking about a guy that could play rover, could play safety, or a guy that could play rover or linebacker and defensive end. I mean, a genuine two-way player, or a Ronan Hanfin guy.
Yeah.
But but what I liked about it though was they made a move on him for some reason, right? And so when the reports came out from other sources, I think it was Tom Loy reported that Notre Dame was cooling on Phil Picciotti. I kind of reached out to my sources and said, hey, what happened? Do you not like this kid? And they're like, no, we still love him. And basically you kind of get into this is more about Preston Zinter than it is about Phil Picciotti or anybody else. It's this kid has really impressed us with what he's done. I think you saw, if you go to the front page of IrishBreakdown.com, because like Ryan, you and I were talking about when we watched this film, like he looks about 6'1.5", 6'2", maybe on junior film, not real long.
Yeah. Then
you see a picture of him at Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman, and he's at least a good 1.5 inches taller than Marcus Freeman.
And Marcus Freeman was like 6'1".
He's 6'1.5". Yeah. I mean, I've had a chance to meet Coach Freeman, and I'm 6 foot. He's at least an inch taller than I am, and so you're like, so this kid hit a spurt. And I think that was one of the things that was sort of that final push for Notre Dame. Like, okay, some of the things that we liked certain things about him, but maybe there's some other guys that fit in a body profile a little bit better. Once he checked that box off, it was kind of like, okay, it's time this is a kid that you want to have. So it was really interesting how this whole thing changed. Because as you said, what we were hearing from Notre Dame from my sources at Notre Dame was, we're not in a hurry to go with anybody. We're not in a hurry to fill this linebacker class out. We're going to be lower on, we can be lower on numbers if we need to be. We can take our time, shoot for big fish, that kind of thing. And then like 2 weeks later, Preston Zinter's in the class, right? Who 2 weeks ago, maybe, people didn't think he would be that kind of guy. And then from your conversations with him, it didn't seem like he was in a hurry. So whatever happened during that visit, I think him and Drake Bowen kind of clicked. I think he got along well with the commits like Brendan Vernon and Drake Bowen. But both sides on this realize, like, dude, this has got to happen. We've got to, we want you want us. Let's make this thing happen.
Yeah. Now, when I spoke to him, I was much more convinced that this was going to kind of be a summer deal, right? Like before the season, because I thought he was going to take more visits. It sounded like, because like I told everybody at the beginning, if you missed it, the 2 weeks prior to the junior day visit, 20 plus schools had been into Central Catholic to talk to him, and he was overwhelmed. He was like, I'm just trying to sort everything out right now. Like, there's a lot of schools that have kind of shown me interest. And then I know that obviously a lot of people probably speculated at some points that, like, his brother plays at Michigan, right? He's got a Michigan offer. That's got to be something that stuck. But when I talked to Coach Adamopoulos, and again, that's going to kind of be in the article that's going to be out here soon on Irish Breakdown, just kind of the insight into the coach's side of the recruiting. Michigan never had an inside track. Preston always wanted to do his own thing. He always wanted to make his own mark. He wasn't trying to just, make the Zinter pipeline to Michigan. He wanted to go where fit best for him. And that junior day, I guess, it obviously sealed the deal for him.
Well, let's not forget too that I know you haven't forgotten this, Ryan, but I want to remind everybody else: if Notre Dame if Zach Zinter would have been a take for Notre Dame, he would have picked Notre Dame. He wanted Notre Dame. I mean, this was a family that he would have chosen Notre Dame in 2019, which you could look back and say, boy, that was a mistake, because they ended up only with 2 offensive linemen in that class, Tosh Baker and Michael Carbon. He came up short on numbers because they tried to be real picky, and then lost on all their top guys, and then decided to, move on Michael Carmody late. They could have still had Zach Zinter at that time and taken both him and Michael Carmody, but for whatever reason, the staff decided not to. And it's worked out for him because he went to Michigan and was a starter on a team that won the Joe Moore Award for Michigan this year.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and he started, I believe, every game at right guard, and he's a good football player, obviously. And, I think the exciting part, too, is that, his brother is a 6'6", 320-plus pound offensive guard, right? I mean, we're already talking about Preston at junior in high school that's 6'3". Could he have another growth spurt ready, Could he get another inch or so? And I know someone put in the chat, I think, that said, no more 6 foot short. Here it is. No more 6 foot short-armed linebackers, right? That's not Preston Zinter. He has that length and he has that growth potential.
And if you're going to take a guy like that, right, 6 foot short-armed linebacker, he better have something special. He better be like a 4.48 or a 4.51 kind of runner. He better be like Jaden Osbury is kind of a 6 foot, not real long linebacker. I'm taking him because he's a freak, But if he's not that, then you shouldn't take him. And I think that's something we've seen from Marcus Freeman is length is a premium. Like Jalen Snead's not that tall. Jalen's only about 6'1.5", but he's long.
Yes,
he's very long. And I think that's something that clearly that Notre Dame was looking for. We do have we have a super sticker from Ali Muhammad. Thank you, Ali, for that. Haven't seen you in the chat in a while. Glad to have you back with us. Brandon Plensner says this. I think this is an interesting take. Brandon says, I like Picciotti more, but I think the staff wants Zinter now. The reason I think why the staff wants Zinter now is his versatility. Notre Dame got a thumper inside linebacker last cycle and now a more athletic, versatile inside linebacker. I think there's something to that, Brandon. I think so too. Picciotti is more of a pure Mike. I think to his point, where Zinter is a Mike, they project him as a Mike, but there's some will potential there, where with Picciotti, he's just a Mike. Well, the problem is Junior Tuihalamaka is pretty much just a Mike. You can't fill up on too many just Mikes. Like we've talked about from an assignment standpoint, Mike and Will are interchangeable. But from a skill set standpoint, there can be differences. You can play Mike but not be able to play Will because you're not great in coverage and you're not quite as rangy. If you can play Will, you can play Mike. In most instances, it's not always the other way around. And so just so people understand what we mean by that. But we're going to dive into some film here too, Ryan. I want to get into a little bit of film here about this young man. I think he is like I said, I like this kid. I think his national ranking, I think Rivals has him at number 214. I think 3 of the 4 major services have him as a 4-star. To me, he is that top 250 caliber guy. He is not a guy that I have as like a top 100 recruit, but he's a guy that I definitely view as this is a guy that you look at and say, this is a good football player now with a ceiling to be even better potentially. Now, the problem with ceiling guys is they don't always pan out, right?
Sure.
There's always a little bit more work to do with those kind of guys, but that's what Notre Dame is banking on. And I think before we dive into the film too, I think that's something that we're definitely seeing a lot more with Marcus Freeman. I feel like with Brian Kelly and his staff, they focused a lot more on the floor, with the exception of maybe D-line, because I thought Mike Elson was really good at finding upside guys. But at a lot of positions, they looked at the floor. And, hey, this is a smart kid. He's heady. He's at least going to be Drew White. He's at least going to be J.D. Bertrand. He's at least going to be, those type of players. And it really seems to me that Marcus Freeman and his staff at all positions are focusing more and more and more on the ceiling. And that's why you look at Gobira, Tyson Ford, Snead, Burnham, Ziegler, Benjamin Morrison. I mean, even Jaden Bellamy, who they like a lot more than I do. The whole discussion is what we think he can be. And that's a change, even on offense with Price and Merriweather and Raridan and Stace. They Emil Wagner at offensive line, right? Ty Chan on the offensive line, Ashton Craig on the offensive line. We're seeing a little bit on offense, but especially on defense, you're seeing upside being the focus. And I think that's smart. Now, if you can find a guy with a high ceiling and a high floor, that's Keon Keeley, that's Brendan Vernon, that's Malik Muhammad, that's Justin Rhett, that's Peyton Bowen. Obviously those are the guys you ultimately want. But the fact that they're focusing on, like, if you're going to take a chance on a Picciotti, I said to a friend like this, Ryan, you tell me if you agree. Phil Picciotti today, as of February 11th, is a better player than Preston Zinter, in my opinion.
No argument. Yep.
In 2 years, if they both reach their full potential, I think Preston Zinter is a better football player than Phil Picciotti. That's kind of how I look at it, and that's how I think the Notre Dame staff looks at it.
Yeah, no, I definitely subscribe to that line of thinking because again, Preston's been asked to do a lot more for his high school than like you mentioned Phil Picciotti. Phil Picciotti is a downhill, explosive, long kid, right? Like that's what he does. But Preston Zinter in the system is asked to cover slot receivers, play over tight ends, play stacked positions, do a lot of different things, rush off the edge. So he's shown the ability to kind of affect the game in multiple ways. So that toolbox, I think the upside is substantial. And I also think, Brian, that, when we're talking about, going for upside a little bit, I think that shows absolute trust in your coaching staff that you can get those guys to a certain point, right? Like, I feel like sometimes if you go to the floor, that's just saying like, we're hesitant on our development a little bit. And I'm not taking a shot at Coach Kelly or, if that was the line of thinking, but I just think that when you do subscribe to, hey, we're going to take a little bit of a gamble on some upside at times, but we think we can capitalize because we have trust in our coaching staff. I think that speaks volumes, and I'm excited for that line of thinking. And I think that, I think that we're seeing some evidence of it. And I mean, we'll see how it works out, but I really do like that they have obviously some confidence in their coaching abilities right now, I would say.
Right. And yeah, that's exactly right. I think a lot of it has to do with their coaching ability, but also Matt Bayless. I think that's a big part of it too.
Development in general. Yep.
Yeah, you give this kid, you give them a guy like this, and he's going to blow up. And I think to your point, I mean, you saw him sitting next to his dad. His dad does not appear to be a very small guy, right?
No.
And his older brother's 6'6", 300 plus pounds. I mean, this kid's got another growth spurt, and he's already hit one. I'm telling you, this kid grew at least an inch since the last time Notre Dame saw him. I'm just telling you by looking at his junior film and just hearing some of the things that were said about him before. It was like, we really like him, but well, the butt got negated the last time they met him because he was bigger. He was just, I'm telling you, go look at the picture on the front page of irishbreakdown.com and you'll see what I'm talking about. Like this kid got bigger. And I think that was the straw for Notre Dame is they always loved how he moved. And it's about, okay, now he's got the size and the length to match that. And I think that's what they were looking for.
You remember a few weeks ago when I texted you about Zinter, right? And I was asking what you thought what his height was, because I thought he was 6'2", right. And then like you said, you see the recent photos and you're like, oh, okay, this kid looks like he may have sprouted a little bit. So
right. If he's 6'2", Marcus Freeman is shrunk.
Right.
Exactly. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
To put it into perspective, like his nose is at the top of Marcus Freeman's forehead. I mean, like if you look at that, I'm looking at that picture now at irishbreakdown.com, but they like the kid. So, I think if you want to disagree with this commitment, I think what I is get off of the discussion of they should have waited, they rushed into this one, all those type of things. What I'm just telling you right now, this was the thing where somebody said to me on the message board, there's a lot of big time linebackers on the board. Why shouldn't they have waited on one of those guys? And my response was because they think he is one of those guys, right? This was not we have to fill spots. Notre Dame could have got away with only 2 linebackers in this class. They knew that, right? But there's a reason they took this kid because they view him. So I think the discussion needs to move away from, the timing of it. Should they have taken him now? Should they have waited? And get into, okay, do you agree with their evaluation of him or not? Because that's where this comes down to. They did not take him because they felt a need to take him to fill a spot or, we're going to get left out in the cold. Trust me, Marcus Freeman has enough confidence in himself as a recruiter that he's not going to be afraid to go down to Texas and battle for Anthony Hill, or down to Louisiana and battle for Jaden Ausberry, or down to Florida and battle for Troy Bowles. Trust me. He thinks he can get those guys, and he hasn't even hired his linebackers coach yet. Right? And so this is about, they think this kid can really play. And so now if you could, I think it's debatable for that. Because what we don't do here, we don't do the whole just trust the coaches thing here, right? Like coaches make mistakes, right? And this is a place where we're allowed to have those conversations. So if you don't think the kid can play, you're welcome to voice that opinion. But all I'm simply saying is, let's not focus on the timing aspect of it, because they don't view this as that. They think this kid is a top linebacker. That's where the conversation should be, is whether or not they are correct or not about that. And I think that would be a bigger conversation to have. And I think that's where that's where we can do it. And I'll have you answer this question, Ryan. Bronx ND fan. I haven't seen you chat in the chat for a while, Bronx ND fan, so good to see you posting in this one. It says, what's the kid's upside potential from a physical perspective, speed, strength, and weight?
Well, I would say, so he's right now right about 6'3". I would say, and let me know if you disagree with this, Brian, I would say 230, 235, he could play at pretty easily, I think, right? Like, I don't know if it's going to go much more than that. But he definitely has, I mean, right now he's about 215, 220. So there's still a substantial weight gain that's going to happen. I think speed-wise, I think I would call him more flexible than I would call him straight line fast, if that makes sense. Like, I think his straight line speed is good. It's sufficient. But I think the thing that he does well is I think he does navigate space pretty well. And I think he actually does move laterally pretty well and kind of redirect in space. Strength-wise, physical.
That right there is the difference between him and Pachotti, in my opinion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think Pachotti's a little bit more explosive downhill in a short area. Like short area, like step to power is a little bit better. I think Zinter has more open. I mean, there's some clips where you'll see him catch a pass and take off running, and you're like, okay, this kid's got some speed, right?
Yeah.
But I think the thing you talked about, and this is very important for a linebacker, is the change of direction, the lateral quickness, those things, the balance, the agility. I think those things are better with Zinter than Pachotti. And I think look, they viewed both of them as really good football players. If they're going to err on the side of who to take, they're going to take the guy with the higher ceiling and the better athlete. And I think there's no doubt, in my opinion, that Zinter's the better athlete. We'll find out if he's the better football player, because as I said, I think we both agree that right now, today, if I'm starting a high school football team, based on what we saw from junior film, Phil Pachotti's a better Mike linebacker than Preston Zinter, mainly because Preston Zinter doesn't play Mike linebacker.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is it's a projection, right? Like they like him at Mike. He doesn't even play Mike for his own school. He plays outside linebacker in a 3-4. He's playing on the ball a ton. He's playing out in space. So it is a projection. But I think when you just kind of see the skill set he has, they think that it parlays to a good Mike linebacker. And I don't disagree. I think when you kind of when you kind of put everything in a row, right, and you just kind of think about the intangibles that make a good Mike linebacker, I think that Zinter has all those tools, and I think the projection makes a lot of sense.
So Ryan, let's dive into a little bit of film here, and let's take a look at. We are joined by my man Vince D'Addario. Vince, you can go ahead and get a swig, buddy. No, all good. We're going to dive into some film here of this young man.
Excellent.
And we'll see. And then what you guys are going to see is, how's the color on that? Look good?
Beautiful.
Yep. Okay, because I still have the same problem I had the other day, Vince.
Oh, okay.
All right, so let's dive into some film here. This is Preston Zinter for Lawrence Central Catholic. You guys go ahead and take it away. So, okay, this connection today is not being very friendly with me. Give me a second, folks.
No problem.
Take your time.
So, Vince, you have some thoughts you want to share about Preston Zinter here?
No, I'm excited. I think we kind of anticipated this, and obviously that's a good thing. But I'm excited about him. I think it just adds to this linebacker. Can we call it linebacker U yet? At least for a couple years here. I mean, I'm enjoying what Marcus Freeman is doing at linebacker. That's for darn sure. And obviously hoping that his Midas touch can spread out to the rest of the team. And but I'm really excited about this kid. I think this kid is a dynamic playmaker, and excited that he's going to be part of the 23 class for sure. No question about that.
Yeah. And Brian, I know why you're getting that up. I know Chris asked, does he still play tight end? Yes, he still is a two-way guy for Central Catholic there.
He plays some receiver as well. He's not just,
they split him out.
You'll see his first highlight film is him playing outside as more of a wide receiver than a tight end. So let's see if this works now. Get this going. All
Technology is beautiful when it works, everybody.
I know. See, it froze again. So I don't know what the heck is going on. There's clearly something going on my end. So I apologize.
You want me to see if I can get it on my end?
Yeah. Well, do you have a second monitor that you can use to bring it up on? Yeah. See, that's the problem.
You're hilarious.
Yeah, I know, right?
I can bring up a different tab, but yeah.
Vince, you don't have it in with a tech guy at your school?
I'm gonna have to step. I mean, look, I brought the flag into the teacher's lounge. I mean, it's one step at a time here.
So this is why so we can kind of share a little bit of why I'm sort of excited, Vince. You know, Vince and I had a little interaction last night where it was like 9:30, and I texted Vince and I said, "Hey, man, I'm really excited." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, you got to jump into this chat this stream that I started." And so we got into the stream, and I showed him the new one that we have. We've been trying for months to try to be able to do some film breakdowns and things like that. And what was happening was we couldn't connect it to like when we would connect it, we would just drop out. And I've had issues with stream with me. Even now I'm dropping out right now. And what was happening was I just had an older version of my iMac. And so it wouldn't connect with like modern stuff. Well, my new iMac arrived this week. I got it set up last night. We ran a test and it went swimmingly. So it's not quite fully set up yet, which is why I'm not doing today's stream from
I was wondering, yeah.
But I'm really getting ready to just say, screw this and just switch the computers out real quick and jump in here because I'm really getting annoyed that I can't watch this film. So
I know, right?
Actually, I think
it's still spinning. So
yeah, it is. It is. So it is what it is. So we're not going to have film of Preston Zinter for some ungodly reason. That is just deciding not to work. So why don't you guys go ahead and answer some questions about Preston Zinter? I'm going to check out of here and see if I can get this switched over.
Okay.
And then we'll go from there. All right.
Sounds good, brother, man.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what we got. Okay, the starred one is for the mailbag.
I think too, while we're kind of waiting, Ryan, I think maybe you could kind of chat about sort of what's next for Notre Dame, and I think obviously as you look at this, I think they'll take a third inside linebacker. I think they would if it's the right guy. But I think the focus right now is probably going to be on guys that could play Rover or Will. Obviously, Drake Bowen could play Rover or Will. So I think there's another guy like that. So that's, I think, kind of the conversation and just who you think some top guys are that they should look at.
Yeah, no, we can do that for sure. So kind of going off of that pathway, and then we'll maybe go into if there's any questions in the chat. So like Brian said, I thought the number was probably 2, but apparently, there is a potential need for a third linebacker. And I think that because we're talking obviously about Preston Zinter, who is much more the Mike, structurally, right?
Like he's an inside guy. Yeah.
Yep. He's a pure inside guy. The staff does think that he can play Will as well, but either way, he's going to be an inside linebacker in this system. Drake Bowen, who I already had a commit from out of Indiana, the in-state kid, he of course is more. He's a Will preferred for me, but also we've talked about the layer that he is going to play baseball at Notre Dame as well. So how much weight is he going to gain, right? Like he might keep his weight around that 215 to 220 range. So he could potentially be a Rover in that system. So finding another guy that kind of fits a similar mold, I think Rover will be an interesting conversation. I know Sam Mpemba down there at IMG Academy is a kid that everyone is extremely excited about. He's 6'4", 230, but he plays a lot in space already, and he would be a very odd body type for a Rover. But if you get a player like him, maybe he's your Will. Drake Bowen goes over to Rover, and you kind of get 3 very different body types and 3 exciting comparative to one another type of players. Jaden Osbury is one that Brian talked about a little bit down there in Louisiana. He is like a pure Will type of player. He's 6 foot, right around 200, 205 pounds. So he's not, comparatively speaking, the biggest linebacker, obviously. But what he is he's a true run and chase Will, extremely explosive, a lot more physical than you would expect for a guy his size as well. So I think that he would be an interesting fit, especially if their outlook eventually is Drake Bowen can be a Rover if his weight gain is not going to be quite what we think it is. But if it is to the point where he can get up to 225, 230, I think Drake Bowen is ultimately the Will. So
okay.
There's a couple guys that are on the board. Yeah.
Okay, we got a couple questions about Preston. So here we go. Bronx ND fan, how's the competition that he plays against? He plays in Massachusetts, I believe.
Yes.
So you can speak to the competition probably a little better than I can.
Yeah. No. So it's good competition comparative to what Massachusetts plays, right? Traditionally, and I put out a article this morning, and I think that everyone should just go take a look at it. I talked historically speaking, the talent that has come out of the state of Massachusetts, and this year specifically, we're talking about, obviously, Preston Zinter is already in the class. They still are high on Ronan Hannafin, who's the wide receiver, could play defensive back, also on defense. And we, of course, Samuel Akulola, who is a 5-star offensive tackle out of the state of Massachusetts as well. So they are heavy. I mean, right now, you got to feel good about where they are with Ronan Hannafin. And then, of course, Coach Heastan and the staff is making a big push for Samuel Okulola. So this could be a tremendous year in the state of Massachusetts. And I went back and I did a lot of research. Preston Zinter is just the 7th player from the state of Massachusetts to sign with Notre Dame in the last 25 years. So It is, and they have never had more than one player sign in a single class from the state of Massachusetts.
And they're on 3. You said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. It could be a huge year. Yes.
I think that number's 8 because the guy that you left out of your article is Barry Gallup.
Barry Gallup.
I understand why you left him out of your article.
Why is that?
Because he wasn't very good. And his dad was the AD at BC at the time. But yeah, so it was one of those like, oh yeah, was he a walk-on? I'm sorry. I'm still working on this, but I just had to jump in and say that because I just love talking about Barry Gallup. There's those weird Charlie White
Barry Gallup.
I just like mentioning the name. And how often
I remember the kid.
How often do I get a chance to bring up Barry Gallup in a conversation?
Not often.
So like when I get to do it, I gotta take full advantage. I gotta take full advantage. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness gracious.
That's all right. So to be corrected, 8 players in the last 25 years. Sorry. But still, either way, still only one that they've never signed more than one player from the state of Massachusetts. And this year, Massachusetts, in the first time in 24/7 sports history, they have a 5-star recruit in Samson Okulola. So it is a rich year for, I mean, there's a safety also, I forget his name, that's in Massachusetts this year. That's a heavy lean towards Georgia right now. So they have some talent in the state of Massachusetts this year, which is super interesting. And I never thought I would come into my first cycle where winning the state of Massachusetts is such a big thing for Notre Dame this year, but it's pretty interesting to see. And I would go check out that article because, I mean, obviously last cycle 2022, they signed Ty Chan out of Massachusetts. Jay Brunel was a guy in 2020. Before that, the last guy was Justin Yoon in 2015. And before that, I think 2013 was John Metellus, who was a guard, switched to defensive tackle. He ended up transferring. And then before that, there was like 2 guys in the 2000s. So it's not been a history of great recruiting wins or, big recruiting time presence in Massachusetts for obvious reasons, right? Like there's not usually a ton of great talent, but there have been, of course, through the years, guys like A.J. Dillon, the Lindstrom brothers, like there's Hunter Long, Pat Fryermuth. There's still been guys. And I just find it really interesting that one of the priority states this year, at least comparative to what they usually produce in talent, Notre Dame is in Massachusetts this year.
I'm going to give this a try, guys. Let's see if this works. So just give me a second here. All right. Is it full screen now?
Except for the 3 of us. Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So let's get rolling. All right.
Looks promising.
Yeah. So this is a linebacker. That's the play I was talking about. Like that's a line. That kid he can move now. Like you know what I mean? Like he can move. And this is what he does mostly, Ryan. This is what you're talking about, kind of that stand-up edge rusher kind of guy. Like the hands there. It's a big kid he's going against.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what they're feeding kids in Massachusetts or whatever it is, but like
this year,
maybe they got some new additions into the the clam chowder or something like that up there in New England. I don't know what's going on, but it is interesting. I mean, you talked about Ryan. You talked about 8 guys in 20 years. Well, they're going to have 5, and if they were to hit home runs in this class with Okulola and Ronan Hannafin, you'd have 5 in the last 4 years.
Yep,
which is again, it's like. If you'd have told me that a few years ago, like, oh man, that's not good. Notre Dame's adding a bunch of kids from Massachusetts. This is not going to go well. But these kids can play. I love the dip and rip here.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really impressive play. Look at the quickness, Ryan. This is the other thing I wanted to show.
I think And obviously we're watching this on offense, so it's, what does it look like on defense, right? But you can see the quick feet here that will translate to playing in space a little bit.
We'll eventually see it.
Yeah.
It was rolling so well.
Yeah, it was. It was going there for a while, and then it decided
not to. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very annoyed right now.
He moves well for a
Yes.
big man. I can tell you that much.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and again, the feet. I like what you were going to see in some of that stuff. I don't know what the heck's going on today, guys, with this whole thing. It's driving me crazy. But it did force me to get my new computer set up. So as you can see, I'm on the new computer. So color's a little bit different and a little bit sharper image, and we'll find out if it's any more clear. But yeah, so a big pickup for Notre Dame. Big pickup for Notre Dame. Yeah,
Brian, can I pull up this question real quick? Why isn't UMass better? I think that's just hysterical.
Yeah, because the best players don't go to UMass.
right.
Yeah,
I mean, historically speaking, most of them go to Boston College, right? And now Notre Dame has their presence. Michigan's had a couple wins in Massachusetts. Those kids just don't stay in state. It's just very simple.
They'll go to Rutgers or anywhere but UMass. Right. I mean, and I've always kind of had a negative view of UMass. We played a team when I was at Muhlenberg College. We played there's this league that's just all the UMass schools, right? UMass Dartmouth and all these different schools. And we played Dartmouth in the playoff, and they were like 11-0. I mean, and they were so small. I mean, we just we annihilated. It's like 56-6. We beat them in the playoffs, and it was just like that's kind of what you see in Massachusetts. You see these smaller,
gritty
D3 type of kids, but they're not. And that's what we're seeing now is we're seeing Massachusetts producing like legitimately good football players. I mean, AJ Dillon. Imagine what things would have been like if Notre Dame would have made the right decision and gone for AJ Dillon instead of CJ Holmes. And what was funny is the whole thing about he wasn't athletic enough. I mean, we watched that kid run the fast. They Notre Dame at their Irish Invasion used to have this sprint from midfield into the end zone. They did it like a competition, but they were just seeing how guys could run. And AJ Dillon smoked all the other running backs, the linebackers. I mean, just smoked them. And yet, Autry Denson, the gift that keeps on giving. So, but I mean, think about that. You'd have had Josh Adams and AJ Dillon running behind the 2017 offensive line. Like that'd have been fun.
and one way. Brian, to kind of emphasize your note about Massachusetts obviously getting a little some higher ranked recruits. When we kind of look at the coach again for Central Catholic, Coach Adamopoulos, who there will be a piece on, and I just love saying that name, so I'm just going to keep dropping that name every chance I can. He told me, and he's been at the school in 38 years, and he said he's had kids, Yale, New Hampshire, like that type of school, right? Like FCS programs, Ivy League schools. And just two of the last, now I guess 3 years, right? With Zach Zinter, the older brother of Preston. Now he's had Michigan and Notre Dame in a couple years. So just kind of to emphasize kind of the influx of talent, I guess we're getting in Massachusetts.
Well, and Okunlola's older brother. Now, not all these kids are from Massachusetts. That's the other thing is there's a lot of boarding schools. Like Justin Yoon, for example, was actually his family lived in Tennessee. He went to the school he went to it was a boarding school. So some of these kids aren't actually Massachusetts natives. Right. It's just they're going to school in Massachusetts. But I think do add to that. But that's not the case for the Zinters. They're Massachusetts natives. I don't believe that's the case for Tai Chan, for example. It wasn't the case for Jay Brunel. It's just overall some of these kids aren't necessarily native New Englanders, or they may be coming from other areas. It's just there's some really good schools, apparently, some really good boarding schools in the state of Massachusetts. So, which is why a lot of those schools feed the Ivies. And I mean, if you think about it, it's really smart. I mean, you're right there in the backyard of how many different Ivy League schools and things like that. So, and that's what you're seeing. I mean, you're seeing more kids going to schools like that to get that opportunity to be noticed. And the more kids from these regions start going to places like Notre Dame and Michigan and Penn State and Pitt, which is the example of Samson Okunlola's older brother, who just he was a 22 kid, right, Ryan? You wrote him. He was a 22 kid signed with Pitt, correct?
Yes. Yep. He had an older brother, older brother, 2022 to Pitt, and then he also had another one in 2019 that I believe is at Merrimack now.
Yeah. So the more you see this, the more you're going to see some kids from different regions saying, "Hey, look, I'm going to go up to this school that's producing all these kids," and I think that helps Notre Dame. I think this type of thing helps Notre Dame because if Massachusetts can start producing a kid or two like this a year, Notre Dame should be able to have success from
Yes,
there.
I agree.
These are academic schools.
Yep.
These are academic families. I mean, Samson Okunlola is not going to the high school he's going to. It was a Thayer Academy because he wants to be recruited as a football player. If that were the case, he would be going one of the Northern Jersey schools, or he would be going down to IMG or something like that. These are academic schools.
Yeah, the makeup of the schools fit Notre Dame's makeup.
Right.
Like it fits
Right.
the type of player that Notre Dame generally in the past has gone after and will have success with, right? I mean, we all know that the recruiting at Notre Dame is changing. It's they're updating themselves, which is good, but they're always going to have inroads at places like that. I mean, they just will. And if they can produce better players, that only helps Notre Dame.
Right. And Sean, we actually Sean, Ryan and I were in a chat yesterday, and we were kind of thinking about, some recruiting topics we can do moving forward. And one of them is going to be, we're going to do a show breaking down sort of what are the base regions need to be for Notre Dame? Like, what's their home? What do they need to have? Is like, you have to dominate this.
Where do they need to have consistent success at?
Yeah. And what regions do you need to maybe get more into nationally, or those kind of things? And we'll kind of break that all down. But a little teaser here: the Northeast is going to be one of those regions where if the Northeast produces a top 150 player, Notre Dame's got to get them.
Absolutely,
more often than not. I mean, like, Penn State's going to beat you every now and then. Ohio State may beat you every now and then, but like, you've got to be able to go into these regions and have success, because, Samson Okunlola is normally, it's kind of like Blake Fisher. Indiana in the North does not often produce kids like Blake Fisher. It's rare. It's like it's like Jalen Smith is another example. You just don't see kids like Jalen Smith come out of Indiana or Ohio or Michigan very often.
Right.
And Blake Fisher, you just don't see those 6'6", 330-pound athletic, high academic kids coming out of anywhere, much less Indiana. And it's the same thing here. You just don't see it. Samson Okunlola's normally come from Georgia, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, California, regions that are a little bit tougher for Notre Dame. So when you do have kids like when you do have a 6'3", 215-pound athletic kid in Massachusetts, with good DNA clearly, you got to get those kids, right? And same thing with Samson Okunlola. Like when a kid like him comes along in Massachusetts, you've got to take advantage and get that kid and keep them in the region, because there's not going to be many that come out of Northeast. There's just not going to be many, and Notre Dame needs to hammer that. They need to be successful there. That's going to be the key.
And I just wanted to bring this up for Chris, and I agree with Chris. You need to dominate Central Indiana, and I don't want to get too far into this because that's what you guys are going to talk about. But look, not everybody in Central Indiana, even though they're a great athlete, is a fit at Notre Dame too. So I mean, that has to be taken into account.
And they're not all Notre Dame caliber athletes.
100% agree.
Warren Central didn't have a kid on their team this past year that was a Notre Dame talent, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And so, yes, Notre Dame should be able to go and get anybody in the state of Indiana that they want. They should be able to do that. I agree with you 100%, but it has to be the right fit.
Right. So that's the thing, is when a kid like these come along in those regions, you have to get them, because they don't come along very often. Because look, you're not going to recruit Massachusetts for numbers, right? You're not going to recruit Jersey and Connecticut for numbers. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about finding depth pieces there. We're talking about when the rare occasion comes along that you have a kid like a Samson Okunlola, like a Preston Zinter. And I would make the same case for Pennsylvania with like Rodney Gallagher, and we'll talk about this week. When kids like that come along in the North, which does not happen often, Notre Dame has to have a high batting percentage for those kind of guys. They have to. And that's what makes Massachusetts this year really unique, because there are, like, Samson Okunlola, like you said, Ryan, didn't you say the first ever 5-star recruit from the state of Massachusetts?
In 24/7 sports history. Yep, first 5-star.
Right. And some of the responses here, I think some of you are missing the point. Where are the playmakers, though? We're not hear what we're saying. We're talking about a couple kids a year, right? And if you can find those kids at certain positions a couple years, where are your playmakers? A.J. Dillon in 2017, right? You should have gone and got him. They're not going to come along very often, but when you get them, when they're there, you got to go get them. And then that supplements the other areas. That's the whole point. It's about using different regions that to have success and build success. And that's kind of that's what the key is at this point in time. And that's where Notre Dame needs to be. Mm-hmm. So, and then they'll get to those others. Where the playmakers, they're still going to find those in the same regions that they found them. But if you now can find an offensive lineman, a linebacker, a running back, the occasional Rodney Gallagher, where's the playmakers? Well, there's one near Philly named Rodney Gallagher that Notre Dame loves and wants. So, when those, but the whole point is that it's rare that those kids are going to be in the North. And when they are, you got to get them. It's rare that there's a quarterback 2.5 hours down the street in Detroit. That's an elite player like Dante Moore. When they come along, you got to go get them. And that to me is the key. And that's what makes Preston Zinter pick up an important one, because he can play. But I also think you're continuing to establish yourself in the Northeast.
Exactly.
Back to where when there's a kid from the Northeast that we want, we go get them. That's the mindset that Notre Dame coaches need to have, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it's not obviously just a North focus, right? Like, they're down in Florida talking to Jaylen Brown. They're in Texas talking to Greathouse. There's, they're all over the place. And it's going to be, they're down in Georgia talking to Caden Lee, who hasn't been offered yet, but they're still doing their due diligence. They're out in California talking to Rico Flores. Like, there's guys on the horizon. To Brian's point, it's just when there are those kids regionally that make sense, you have to get them.
It's like we had an article yesterday about Chicago. Chicago's never going to be for Notre Dame. Well, at least I don't see it unless major changes happen, demographic shifts happen again. And usually those take about a decade to really pay off when those changes do happen. Like, it took a while for North Carolina to benefit from a recruiting football standpoint from the population shifts that were going to the Carolinas. But barring a population shift or major changes to the academic situation in Northern Illinois, Chicago's never going to be the feeder program, the feeder area like it was 20, 30 years ago, where, back in the 50s, I mean, you could, talk to Lou Samoji. I mean, they'd get 5, 6, 7, 8 guys a year from Chicago, and they're like big time players. But when a Carnell Tate comes along, when a Caleb Brown comes along, you've got to get those guys. And that's the point. And, you just can't miss. You can't miss on those guys. And Chris Ayers is kind of still hammering on the Central Indiana thing. Notre Dame didn't recruit David Bell very hard. I know he was a borderline academic kid. That's not accurate, Chris. Notre Dame recruited him very hard until it got to the point where they realized he can't get into school. I mean, Brian Kelly was one of the first kids from his class that Brian Kelly went and saw in person. When Brian Kelly goes and see a kid in person, that doesn't happen very often. And so that tells you what they thought of him, but they couldn't get him to school.
Exactly.
Right. And that's the reality. I mean, when there's a kid from Indianapolis that can get into school and has that type of high level profile, Notre Dame has gone down and gotten them more often than not. I mean, Zach Martin, Nick Martin, Blake Fisher. I mean, there's been plenty of guys from that region, but the reality is that region doesn't produce a lot of Notre Dame kids, either academically or talent wise. And people talk about Center Grove. Look, I know that Caden Curry was highly ranked, and he's a heck of a high school football player. He does not project to the next level as well. He just doesn't, in my opinion. And he's not real big. He's not 6'5" like he's listed. He's a heck of a high school player, but Notre Dame made the evaluation that Tyson Ford and Aiden Gobira are better. And I agree. I think they fit the system better. Taven Jackson, I'm sorry, he's not a Notre Dame fit at quarterback. He just doesn't fit their system, and I wouldn't have recruited him. I saw him at a camp. I'm like, I wouldn't touch this kid. Now, I do think at times Notre Dame has in the past been a little harder on Indiana kids. Like, I'm sorry, they nitpicked George Karlaftis. They should have had George Karlaftis on the roster, right? I mean, could you imagine this year with George Karlaftis, a big end, and Isaiah Foskey at Viper? Look, they nitpicked him because of where he was from. It happens.
Sure.
I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. And I'm not saying it's not going to be perfect, but again, I think the argument being made here is one that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because we're not saying don't recruit Central Indiana, go to Massachusetts.
I'm not saying that at all. No,
you're kind of missing the point. It's like those type of kids don't come along very often in Notre Dame's backyard or regions in the North that Notre Dame is going to have more success than they would in certain regions. That's why they've got to get back to being more successful in Northern Jersey. They can't that's why Ryan's got an article that's going to come out soon about DC. that's an area that Notre Dame should be having more success in.
Sure,
right?
sure.
If you're building your entire, roster around going down to Florida and Texas and California to build your roster, you're just not going to be where you need to be. And Bama goes up to DC. They get kids from there. They get kids from Jersey. Where's John Mechie from? Right? Where were the Kajando brothers from? Right? Where was Terrell Hall from? Or Terrell Lewis? I forget which direction it went.
He's Lewis now. He's
Lewis now. So he was Terrell Hall and then went to Terrell Lewis. They've gone up there and found guys, right? And Caleb Williams, where was he from? This is a Catholic school in DC, right? So I think that's the point that needs to be made is there are certain regions, and we'll dive more into this next week when we talk about it, which I'm excited about those shows. But that's kind of the thing that's why this is an important pickup beyond just this is a good player.
Right. And look,
you need to get when top kids come along, you just
sure. And that's the thing. In Indiana, it falls under that category. If there's a top kid in Indiana, you go down and get them. The thing is, football in Indiana isn't fantastic. Okay. I coached football in Indiana for 15 years. Okay. And I've seen the cathedrals and the Catholic schools in Fort Wayne and Indy and all of those different places. They're more the sum of their parts than they are individual talent is the best way to put it. Okay. Look, where I coach up here in Northern Indiana, would I take the guys that they have at Cathedral and things like that? My former quarterback is the tight ends coach at Cathedral. And he's living the dream down there. He's got some massive dudes and they're great athletes and they're great kids. But again, it's the sum of the parts. It's not necessarily a standout kid who's going to be going to Notre Dame. And that's the point that I'm making.
In Notre Dame, but when those kids do come along, Notre Dame has to get them.
Exactly.
They can't miss on Pete Werner. They can't not get Pete Werner. Right. And I don't 100%. Care if they went 4-8. No, look, they can't not get Pete Werner.
Right.
Marquis Stepp was a situation where if it wasn't for academic hurdles, he would have been in there.
He would have been here. Yeah, right.
And so, but you can't miss on the Pete Werners, right? You can't miss on the James Hursts, who was an Indiana kid that went to North Carolina and became a draftable player. Ryan, do you remember where he was drafted? Do you remember he was drafted in the day 2? Was he a day 2 pick? I feel like he was like 3rd or 4th round.
I think it may have been sometime early day 3, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
I'll look it up.
But that's the thing though, is like, yes, you're right, Chris. They can't miss those guys. But it's the same. But what I'm arguing is that you're never going to have enough volume from that state. Actually, he went undrafted. I thought he got drafted. Yeah, I thought he got drafted because he was an All-American guy.
He's been sticking around for 7 years. Though,
yeah,
so
seriously. Yeah. But so the point is, Indiana's never going to be a state that's going to just provide Notre Dame with 5, 6, 7 kids every year. Chicago's not going to be that. Like Ohio is going to give Ohio State at least 6 or 7 kids a year if they're doing it right. Michigan is always going to give the Wolverines at least 4 or 5 kids a year, guaranteed in-state, like really good players. That's not the case in Notre Dame. There's going to be years where there's none. And that's the reality of it. There's going to be years where there's multiples. Like this year was a good year for Indiana. Notre Dame got 2 really good offensive linemen from the state. In 2023, they're going to get one of the best linebackers in the country from right in their backyard. It was important to get Drake Bowen, and that's the point. But it's one kid, right? It's maybe 2 if there's a couple other kids you could look at, right? And so again, Chris.
This is my point right here.
This is kind of you're missing the point.
This highlights my point. Carmel runs. Last time I checked, they run triple option with the double wing and the fullback and all of that. It's the sum of the parts. Once again, that's a high school offense, and they beat them by 2 points.
Right.
Okay.
Andrean went up to Michigan and played Nolan Ziegler's private school and got beat by like 30.
Right.
So we could do this dance all day, right?
Absolutely. It's the sum of the
no
parts,
one's saying that Indiana football is terrible, right? But what I'm telling you is there's a reason why Notre Dame's not recruiting a bunch of Indiana kids every year. There's good football programs. It's like why doesn't Ohio State get a kid from St. Ignatius every year? St. Ignatius is still a great high school football program, but they don't get kids from there every year. Why?
Exactly.
Because they're not producing Ohio State caliber players all the time. They're great high school football teams, right? And that's the whole point. And so Good God.
Now we're
I'm
splitting hairs.
done. I'm done with it. We're moving on.
Now we're splitting hairs.
Why
Yeah,
isn't
that's
Indiana
correct.
and Purdue 12-0 every year then? I mean, Indiana recruits Central Indiana, right? Don't they get all the kids from there? Why are they like the second worst team in the Big Ten this year with all those Indiana kids? I don't understand it. So we're moving on from this. Notre Dame's not recruiting enough Indiana kids conversation. So anything else you guys want to add about Preston Zinter before we move on to the mailbag?
No, I think it's a good fit from a lot of different angles, and I think that he fits with what Drake Bowen brings to the table stylistically. So I'm happy with the commitment for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think the interesting about Bowen is I do think there's a chance they could consider him a rover.
Yeah,
and I think they'd like a rover in this class, but I think part of that's going to be determined by the current roster.
Sure.
If they think Jalen Snead can stay at rover with Nolan Ziegler, I think it takes away some of the need to definitely get a rover in this class. Like if you can get one, you get one, but you don't need to force it,
Right.
in my view. And so I think that does add a little bit to the conversation. So Vince, you got some things started. So we're going to dive into the mailbag portion of this, and I have a feeling we're not going to get a lot of mailbag questions today because I think that kind of not doing two shows, I think it made expedient, but I'm curious how people are going to react to it. So let's kind of get
let's start rolling here.
Yeah, let's get into some of these questions.
Here we go. Q Kibbs right off the bat for mailbag. I like that, by the way. Letting us know that's what it's for. Say you get you get to name 5 guys. I'm going Patterson, Tyree, Foskey, Hart, and Mayer. Also, wouldn't be shocked if Pine earns a C even if he doesn't win the job.
You talking about captains?
Yeah, I think captains.
Were you guys talking about that at some? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
We're predicting captains. I mean, for me, I would say
some of them he's got, right?
Yeah, I would say Patterson for sure, right?
Yeah,
Mayer. Yeah, I would say Mayer. Foskey makes a lot of sense. Those are like the 3 that popped off.
Jason Adamiola's got to be on there.
Agreed.
Okay.
I mean, because he's more of the vocal leader of the D line. Foskey's more of a I'm going to go show you how to prepare. I'm going to go do it. He's not. I mean, you talk to anybody around the program, they're going to tell you especially the second half of the year, the vocal leader of the defensive line was Jason Adamiola. I mean, he was the guy. And there's some things that happened with other teammates where Jason kind of stepped in and said, that's not okay. And I think he's really earned a lot of respect from teammates as that kind of guy. I'd be a little surprised if Jason Adamiola is not a captain this year as well. And obviously, I think Avery Davis was already a captain. I don't think he's done anything to not continue being a captain.
Yeah, to lose that
captain. Like Tyree wouldn't be on there for me just because I don't want Chris worrying about that. For me, it's I just go play ball, right? Like you've got Avery Davis already. He's a captain. You'll have Mayer as a sort of a do as I do, kind of captain.
Sure.
Yeah, I like Cam Hart because I kind of like a captain that's got a little bit of swagger and
he's
got some swagger.
Yep, absolutely.
And I like that, but I think Bo Bauer's one.
I was going to say Bo, and then maybe a little bit of a curveball potentially because won't be with the program for very long. Is Brandon Joseph, right? Like I would think, going to be in a leader role pretty quickly in the secondary with the experience he has.
It would be interesting as a transfer to see how they operate with captainship. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How quickly he can establish himself, and it depends on when they decide to name captains too.
Yeah,
right. I mean, are they going to wait?
I would want him to focus because, I don't think they named Jack Cohn a captain, right?
They did not. No.
So to me, I just would want if he comes back in 2023, I'd say then you can be a captain because he was a team captain in Northwestern, right? I mean, to your point, Ryan. I mean, he was a team captain this last year at Northwestern. He's clearly got captain responsibilities. Like what I would say is like if they name like captains at the end of spring, I would not make him a captain. If he has earned that and his teammates view he should be that, then I would add a couple. So like to the question, if I had to name 5, he would not be in my 5. If I'm the coach and I'm going to name 5 and then the team gets to vote for 2 more, it wouldn't then shock me if all of a sudden he is part of that conversation.
Gotcha.
That would be just for me where because I don't want him worried about that either. Like that's the whole thing is like, you're making a transition. Just, hey man, just go make plays.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
just go make plays. So
worry about
my
learning the
5
playbook, learning your player,
Yeah.
your teammates, coaches, all that.
My 5 would be Patterson, Mayer, Avery Davis, Jason Adamiola, and I'd probably go Cam Hart. Yeah, I'd probably go Cam Hart, because if I don't go Cam Hart, and Vince is not going to want to come hang out in the Super Bowl on Sunday, he's going to be still mad at me. And I bought us food for nothing, you know? So I'm going to have to go with Cam Hart on that one.
Well, and you had 3 offensive players. You had 1 defensive player. So I feel like you had to add a defensive player. Not to even – it doesn't have to be even, but like having 3 and 2, if you're naming 5, you know, is better. But
yeah, and I mean, I don't know who that 4th offensive guy would be. I mean, there's nobody else that I would –
nobody at wide receiver that I would put up. That
because I'm not one of those people that believes you have to make your starting quarterback a captain. I don't. I mean,
he's going to be a sophomore, true sophomore.
Well, I mean, and beyond that, the quarterback already look. I don't care if you have a C on your chest or not. When you're in the huddle and the quarterback's talking, he's the captain of the huddle. You know what I mean? Like when the quarterback speaks, you listen whether he's got a C on his chest or not. And so I'm just not one of those. I'm not one of those that thinks like, hey, you have to name your quarterback a captain. Like Drew Pine, if Drew Pine wins a starting quarterback job, I'd be more tempted to make him a captain than I would.
Because he's got captain qualities.
Yes.
For sure that I've seen. And it would be weird for them to name him a captain and he's not the starter. I will say that, but he drips and bleeds like leadership. He just does to me when I see him at practice. So I could see that happen. If they were going to name a non-starter as a captain, he would be the leader in the clubhouse.
Right. But again, you don't have to have a C on your chest to be a captain.
100%. He will still do
like a captain. Right.
He will still do all of that, regardless of whether he's got a C on his chest or not. So, which is one of the things I love about that kid.
It's a fun question. That's like a great mailbag question.
It's a great mailbag.
Like
it is a great question. Yeah. Jeff has the next one. Late to the show. How big of a deal is the loss of Nick Lazinski?
I wasn't aware that they lost Nick Lazinski.
I didn't.
Did that happen today?
I was wondering if you knew the answer to that too, Brian. I didn't realize he had gone either. I figured I would hear that, although it's a little under the radar.
I wasn't aware of it either.
Yeah, I'm going to go see if there's any news about him. Oh, so see, it just happened 5 minutes ago. Vanderbilt is set to hire Notre Dame defensive analyst Nick Lazinski as its new linebackers coach. So, I mean, it's a
good for
loss.
Him. Good for him, though.
He deserves it.
Yeah,
I mean, beyond the loss for Notre Dame, this guy so deserves a position. Now, Clark Lee almost hired him a year ago.
Right.
He just didn't have it. Just didn't fit like the D-court. I think Jesse Minter was the linebackers coach, right, Ryan? Wasn't he?
Yeah.
Wasn't he the linebackers coach?
I believe so. Yep.
They promoted. I believe the guy they promoted is a secondary coach. The guy they were promoted. I believe this is accurate. Ryan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the guy that Vanderbilt promoted to replace Jesse Minter, who went to Michigan as their new D coordinator, I believe he was a DB coach. So there now was room for just a linebackers coach at Vanderbilt, which last year it did, because that's the thing is about putting a staff together is you may have this linebacker coach that you love, and Clark Lee really liked Nick Lazinski, but the way the makeup of your staff of who your coordinator is going to be, it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, didn't fit.
And so now it does. And so I'm happy for Nick. They're losing an analyst. I don't think analysts are needle movers in regards to if you lose one, all of a sudden you're going to stink, unless it's like you've got Steve Sarkisian as an analyst, which I believe he was for like a very short period of time. But look, it's a loss. I like Nick a lot. Nick did a lot on the recruiting trail, but there's guys that are going to be able to there's going to be guys that they can replace him with. So I'm not even worried about the loss. I'm just happy for Nick.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, real happy for Nick.
He's really worked his butt off.
He's going to be it won't shock me if he's back at Notre Dame someday as a position coach.
Absolutely.
And again, I think Marcus Freeman would have really liked to have had him on staff as a coach. I've been told Coach Freeman likes Nick a lot. It's just the makeup of your staff can sometimes make it hard to promote a guy like that. Like the reason that they promoted Chris O'Leary over Nick Lazinski last year, part of it was the position fit. Because Chris O'Leary is more of a natural safeties coach, where Nick is more of a linebacker guy, and that's kind of how it works out sometimes. It's unfortunate, but I'm happy as heck for Nick. So that's
awesome.
That's
awesome.
really good for him. Yeah.
Steve D. This is obviously a question for our recruiter. Where do we stand with Avery Davis, the quarterback, Mays, Kansas? The articles in Wichita, Kansas newspaper suggest he's likely no longer considering Notre Dame.
Well,
Yeah,
look, go ahead, Ryan. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was just going to say that I was able to touch base with one of the coaches there, and it does seem like it's cooled a bit. Like, it doesn't seem like there's been any movement in a good direction. I think part of that is what we've just been talking about with Dante Moore is kind of the guy, and everybody's just, I don't want to say on the back burner, but I think that it's clear what the tiers of. Well, okay, he's sort of on the back burner a little bit as they're trying to take their move for Dante Moore, and that's just is what it is. Avery Johnson, I believe, is still a nice player, nice quarterback recruit, but as of right now, it seems like it's Dante Moore or nothing for the staff.
That's right scary. Now they're doing a good.
Maybe not nothing, but Dante Moore first
or nothing is in like the who they're pushing forward to take a commitment from is what Ryan means, because they're actually doing a decent job of kind of building a who do we turn to if we don't get Dante kind of thing. And here's the thing about Avery. Avery's the kind of kid that if Notre Dame ramped things back up, they'd get right back in it with him, in my opinion. Sure. And so I do believe Dante's going to commit soon enough to where they're going to be able to do that, where they could go back in on Avery and say, hey, look, we love you and that kind of thing. But they're like the Marcus Stokes, I think is the name of the kid in Florida that they're talking to. Like, they're actually doing a pretty decent job of having here's what happens if we miss on Dante. But right now, the Notre Dame staff doesn't think they're going to miss on Dante. I have been saying you got to admit, I've been saying for a while that Notre Dame is in a much better position with Dante Moore than people think. And that's kind of where we're at. So I think he's I think Tommy's done a great job there. And here's the thing about Notre Dame and Dante Moore. Marcus Freeman has yet to really ramp up his involvement with Dante, partly because he thinks Tommy's crushing it, right? So that's allowed him to kind of get on the road and go see other guys. He did go to King to see him like during the open period, but that's the thing that also is like Coach Freeman is yet to really ramp that up on his end. So Tommy's already put Notre Dame in position to where they're at worst like 1A, 1B with somebody. Contrary to recent articles saying that Notre Dame, that it's a Miami, Michigan State battle. Don't even get me started on that. But Notre Dame's in a great position, and I've always felt that. But now it's about closing, right? And that's the deal. It's about closing. They've got to close because he is a game changer, in my opinion.
Most important question of the day.
These guys are coming hard.
Zacco is coming with the fire today. Okay.
I mean, yes. The answer is yes.
Let me read this, Vince. Let me read this so people on the pod. Yeah. Vince, would you wear a Michigan jersey for a week if it meant we signed Dante Moore? Now, for those who may be new, Vince hates Michigan with the burning fires of hell. Okay. So yes, if he could give Michigan to Canada tomorrow, he would do it.
I mean, right? Absolutely. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Absolutely. But I would make sure that like the jersey never actually touched my skin. Like I make sure I have some undergarments, that kind of a thing. But absolutely. Because short-term loss, long-term gain, baby.
Dude, absolutely. If it meant getting Dante Moore, Vince would have – don't even lie about the wouldn't let it touch your body. If it meant getting Dante Moore, you'd put on maize and blue underwear, Michigan socks, Michigan hat. You'd wear some like those stupid glasses that they wear at football games. You know what I'm talking about? Like
the leather helmet with the wings on it and everything.
Yes, yeah, 100%. He would rock that for a week if it meant getting Dante Moore. He's playing tough now, but dang well if it meant getting Dante Moore, you would rock it.
There's a lot I would do. There really is a lot.
I would do.
Just saying, just put it out there. There's a lot I would do. But yeah, absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
Let's change the subject. Domer Grizz for the mailbag. If I recall correctly, which by the way, I had to look at that for 5 minutes to figure out what IIRC meant. If I recall correctly, you felt Taylor made a mistake by going all in on Shipley and not recruiting the whole board. Why is that not the same for Reese going all in on Dante Moore? Bigger gap between 1 and 2?
Not that there's a bigger gap, but you're taking all in to mean something that I don't mean it to be. I don't mean all in to be you don't have anybody else on the board. The problem with the way that they recruited Will Shipley is that there was literally nobody else. That they just stopped talking to everyone else. There was nowhere to turn afterwards. Now they had to manufacture getting back in now, and they were able to benefit from, Terry Joseph had a relationship with Louisiana, and that was able to get him in the door with Logan Diggs. Tommy Reese did a great job on that one too, but like Lance Taylor didn't have much to do at all with Logan Diggs getting the job or getting coming to Notre Dame. And so it was a different scenario. However, even if Notre Dame went the Will Shipley route with Dante Moore, I'd say okay. Because here's the deal you have to understand about Dante Moore. And this is what I said before. I said when we had that show where we talked about they got to go all in, I said, I'm not normally a proponent of this, right? I'll admit it. I'm not normally a proponent of this because I feel like you get into situations where you end up with what happened with Will Shipley, right? And to me, this is different because this is that position and this is that player that is different. Like part of the reason you don't go all in on Will Shipley is because he's from South Carolina and Clemson wants him, right? Where'd he go? Clemson. Right, like you got to have some sense that this may not work out in our favor, right?
Right.
Dante Moore's from about 2.5 hours down the road. It's a little bit of a different situation. He's not that much further away from you than he is from Ann Arbor. It's like,
because the Shipley thing was a location.
Yeah,
issue,
he was in.
Right?
He was from South. He was from.
Yeah.
Was he from North Carolina or
North
South?
Carolina? I believe he was from North Carolina, but
right.
Either way,
Carolinas. Right.
It was the distance was an issue with him.
And that was part of what he said, right?
Yeah.
I don't think and the extra hour and a half, 2 hours to get to South Bend by car is going to have that big of a difference on Dante Moore, right?
Right.
So the point being is there's a lot of different factors about it, but Domer Grizz, no, this is different for me, right? This is a unique thing for me, and I'm not going to like in 2024. I wouldn't say go all in for whoever that they pick as their guy. I think this is a unique situation that you have a special talent that's really close by, and you're at that point in your career or your tenure here at Notre Dame and as a program more so is the better way to say it, where this is the one that you need to have this happen to get over the hump. And what I mean by get over the hump is not say that Tyler Buckner can't be that guy, because I think Tyler Buckner can be that guy. But you can't just have Tyler Buckner and then you're back to start Ian Books and Jack Cones again, right? You've got to start building.
You got to continue that, and it's got to be about every 2 years. You got to bring in a difference maker. You have to. And
also, I think Dante Moore is a bit of a Pied Piper in this class. I think he's that kid.
I mean, Carnell Tate said it without saying it. I mean, basically, and
Jaylen Brown. I mean, Brian Smith has talked about this with Jaylen Brown. I guarantee you, as Ryan starts to get to know Rodney Gallagher more, he's going to have a lot to say about Dante. He knows. I guarantee he knows who Dante Moore is. Right. And that's a different where Will Shipley's not like, oh, Will Shipley went to Clemson or Notre Dame, let's follow him. It's just a different position. It doesn't mean he's not a great player. I also the final piece to answer this question is, there's a big difference between a running back and a quarterback.
Right.
And I've said this all along. Oh, you give me a great offensive line and a good running back, and I'm going to be able to win a championship. But you have to have a great quarterback, in my opinion, can impact a team and a program much more than a great running back.
Yeah.
And that's the other factor too, in my opinion. Ryan, you have anything to add to that?
No. Like my biggest thing was what you just mentioned as the last point is that there's a huge difference between quarterback and running back, right? Like you're take your swing at the defensive quarterback. I'm never going to, even if you miss out, I'm never going to say anything negatively because, you have to take a swing at that position. That's just, kind of my 2 cents on it.
Yep.
Sparkling Swan. He has a Twilight Zone question. Does Marcus Freeman get Jabril Peppers from Paramus Catholic if he's the coach?
I don't think so.
No. I don't know anything about that recruitment or how that went.
No,
I don't think so. And they ended up hiring his high school coach, which factored into that as well.
That helps.
Was it Chris Partridge? I think is his name. So no, I don't think Jabril Peppers was ever going to come to. I think you could look back. I think Sparkling Swan. It would be fun to look back over the years and be like, who would they have gotten if so and so was here or that kind of thing. I think those are fun to do, especially in a mailbag.
Oh yeah.
But Jabril Peppers is not one that I would. Like, okay, here's one that I think they might have had a shot to get if he was here. Jason Onye. That's one I think they'd have had a shot to get. The kid that they lost to Penn State.
I think
that's one. Yeah. Huh?
I said,
I said Onye. I'm thinking of the kid that they got last year. But
Jason
I was like,
I'm pretty sure he's on the roster, but
Jason
I know it's like
you're like Jason Owe, the kid that went to Penn State. That was a
Yes.
first-round draft pick this past year.
From
I think they
Blair,
would've got
Blair
him.
Academy.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people thought they were going to get him for a while at Notre Dame, but just didn't work out. The coordinator it was Mike Elson by himself again, right? And as we've talked about that, you can't be that way. So that's a guy. I think that would be a fun endeavor to kind of have one of these days just to kind of go through like, who do we think they would have got if Marcus Freeman was here? But then the counter is like, well, Marcus Freeman wouldn't have been Marcus Freeman 5 years ago and 6-7 years ago when Jabril Peppers was coming out. He'd have been a guy that just got fired at Purdue. You know what I mean? So
you're not wrong.
That timing is important to it, but it's a good question.
Next up,
we don't care about context, Brian. We just want to know.
I know.
Context, you silly fool. All right, Benjamin with the super chat. Thank you very much. I was wondering, I saw that Notre Dame has new pride stickers on the helmets for practice. Do you know what those are for? Thank you. They're not new. They had them all year this year.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember if they had them in the past, but they definitely had them this year. They were green and they were on their practice helmets. I'm sure it's for – they have a point system when they do stuff in the weight room. I'm sure it had something to do with that.
I'm going to text a friend and see if he knows why.
Ooh, a lifeline? Is that a lifeline?
Yeah, I'm calling in. I'm calling in a friend.
But I like it at practice. I actually really like it at practice. I think it's just another motivator because practice gets tedious. I mean, it just does. And so that's yet another motivator that you can use for practice. I am on record. I do not want them to do it for games. Do not mess up that beautiful gold helmet with stickers. I like pride stickers in general. Like we've done that at the high school level at places I've coached. I actually like it because it does motivate kids. Not at Notre Dame. Do not put anything on.
Well, it's like Ohio State. I love that. That's the one thing I love about Ohio State's uniform.
Right, but it works for them. It works for them. Yeah, it works.
I'm not doing it at Notre Dame.
Exactly. It's just
like
different.
Remember I don't know if they still do it now, but I remember back in the day at Florida State, like if you could tell like who the dudes were for Florida State because they'd have like a million tomahawks on their helmets. You know what I mean? Like,
which is bad A. Like I like that.
Must be pretty good. He's got nothing but tomahawks on his. Can I say something too? Like Jack Cohn just continues to kind of go up in my favorite people list. So he's at the Shrine Bowl, and what they do with these Shrine Bowls is like they trade decals and they do all this kind of fun stuff. And
always.
And Jack Cohn comes out for the game, and there's not a single decal on his helmet. It's just a gold helmet. I'm like, this kid gets it.
Yeah,
this kid so gets it.
You don't mess that up.
Like even Drew Tranquil, I think, had a decal on his helmet when he was a Senior Bowl, I believe. Like which I don't have anything wrong with it. I get it. Yeah. Like it's what, it's fun and you're building these bonds, these connections. So it's not wrong to do it, but it's right to not do it, if that makes sense. And we just like Jack Cohn was here for a year, and I feel like he gets Notre Dame more than Brian Kelly ever did in 12 years. And then he played well, which makes it
well. Yeah, that didn't hurt. That didn't hurt.
Yeah, just like that kid.
Kirk D.A. Anderson Fitness, thank you for the super chat. Just joined the chat. Is Preston Zinter, quote unquote, long or just fast and athletic? I asked because you guys have pointed out the lack of length for our linebackers. That used to be a problem at linebacker. That is not a problem currently, but continue.
Well, Kirk, he is long to start out with. He is 6'3", it seems, and he has pretty good arm length, I would say. But I also do think that he's like we talked about it a little bit in the start. I think he redirects really well in space. I think he has a lot of quickness to him. I think straight line speed is good too. Like I don't think it's deficient in any way. So to answer the question, I guess it would be yes to all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I got nothing to add to that. Yeah,
cool.
I think
works for me. Monoler. I'm going to go Monoler. Brian, you were disappointed with the wide receiver hire because of what was passed over, wide receiver coach. Why do you seem more confident with the Parker hire? I didn't see anything that stood out about his resume.
Well, first of all, I wasn't disappointed. I said I'm willing to give Chancey Stuckey an opportunity. It's a known commodity. I think the biggest difference between that and the Parker hire is what's different about. I mean, I don't see anything stood out about his resume. One thing that stands out compared to Chancey Stuckey is he's coached more than 1 year. I mean, that was it. Look, I never said that I don't think Chancey Stuckey could be a good coach. I mean, clearly they saw something that they liked. It's the known versus the unknown, right? And that I've always been honest about that. But what we said at the time was because Chancey Stuckey's such an unknown commodity, it's a gamble. Whereas I think Jamarcus Shepard would have been more of a sure thing.
Sure.
But it's a gamble. We'll say, okay, but as I've always said, if you got the chops, you got the chops, man. And I'm willing to give Chancey Stuckey the opportunity. And Ryan keeps talking to me all the time about how when he talks to receivers, like they don't just mention like, yeah, I talked to Coach Stuckey. Like they have excitement in their voice when they talk about Coach Stuckey, right, Ryan? I mean, that's something that we've discussed.
It's unprompted a lot too. Like they'll just bring them up. I don't even ask like, oh, how's Coach Stuckey doing? They're like, oh yeah, Notre Dame's. It's been great conversations. I talked to Coach Stuckey a ton. He's a great guy, very religious person. Speaks highly of, himself, obviously of the background, and so they speak praises of him to say the least.
Now with Parker, I mean, nothing stood out about his resume. I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he didn't coach at Bama or Ohio State, but like this is a guy that was the offensive coordinator at West Virginia for 2 years. He was at Purdue for several years. He's been a recruiting coordinator. I believe he's coached special teams as well. This guy's been a coach for 10 years. And the biggest thing about his resume is he coached with Marcus Freeman for like 5 years.
Right.
So clearly Marcus Freeman has seen this guy day after day after day.
On the job interview.
On the recruiting trail. Right.
Yeah.
And he thought highly of him. So it's just more about it's a known commodity. Right.
Exactly.
And with Chancey Stuckey, my only issue with Chancey Stuckey was it's just the unknown. The guy's been a football coach for 1 year, but as I've said before, and I'll always stick to this, I don't care if you've been coaching for 1 year or 30 years. If you got the chops, you got the chops. And if you don't, it's like there are guys that's like, how could that guy be coaching that long and still not be good? Because some people just don't have it. Experience doesn't fix everything.
Yep.
And a lack of experience doesn't guarantee a lack of success. So, it's very different resumes. A fair question. I appreciate the question, but it's just, to me, it's the known versus the unknown. I feel like I know at least what the bar is going to be for Jared Parker. Will he be a great tight ends coach, great recruiter? I don't know. We'll find that out.
Right.
But
we may not find it out this year because the lead tight end is so stinking good. I mean,
right.
What is he going to do with those other guys?
Well, I think we can find out because we can see, okay, did Michael Mayer's game improve or not, right?
Sure.
And was he able to get the number 2 and number? I think George Takis leaving is going to give us a better opportunity to learn more about Jared Parker this year than we otherwise would have learned about him. But
I agree with that.
But that's the unknown. But I'm excited by what coach. I mean, because one thing I did say is, I'm pretty sure I said this, is no matter what, Chancey Stuckey's an upgrade from what they had before. The question is how big of an upgrade.
Right.
I think that's the question at this point in time. But so far, so good. So far, so good. And Ryan's talked a lot about he's seen a lot of Baylor film. Up until recently, he had seen a lot more Baylor film than I had, and had talked about how these guys were well coached this past year. So I'm excited to see what he can do. But it's still an unknown until we actually see him do it.
Exactly. John A1, can you talk about the difference of getting young talent on the field because you must versus the talent being so good the kid is ready to play? Mailbag.
It's a great question. I think the difference is it's like with anything. You don't ever want to have to do anything because you have to.
Exactly.
Right? You don't ever want to blitz because you have to. You don't ever want to have to pass because you have to. You don't ever want to have to play a freshman because you have to. You want to do those things because that's what's best for you. So I think the difference in getting young talent on the field because you must is it has a greater impact on what you do as an offense. So like if you're in a situation where like 2007, right, is a perfect example. Notre Dame played a ton of freshmen and sophomores that year, not because they wanted to, it's because they had to. They had no other good options because of how bad Ty Willingham's last couple of recruiting classes were.
Right.
And so you have to play young guys. And so when you have to play young guys, we've talked about, like, I don't care if the guy can only run 4 routes. Put him on the field and let him run 4 or 5 routes, right? But that's in a situation where you're putting that young guy on the field for 10, 12 snaps a game to kind of get him some experience. If you have to put that guy on the field because you don't have anybody to turn to, you're going to have to live with the fact that when he's in the game for more volume, there's things you can't do schematically because of that player. Or, like in 2017 when Notre Dame had to play Kurt Hinish and Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa, you understand these guys are freshmen, they're undersized, they're going to get moved around a little bit. So you're going to have to make sure that when they're on the field, you're protecting them to a certain degree. So anytime you have to play a freshman, more often than not, there's dangers because that guy's either physically, mentally, or whatever the case, not ready to play. And sometimes you get lucky and a guy is, like Alizé Mack, in 2015. Alizé proved to be ready to play. They played him because they had to, but he also
exactly.
Played pretty well that season. Other times, like Michael Mayer, they didn't need to play Michael Mayer. He was just too good not to play, right? They didn't need to play Robert Hainsey. He was too good not to play. But then you get into a situation like with Clarence Lewis in 2020 where once Tariq Bracy kind of lost it, there was nowhere else to turn except the freshman class. Right. That's never where you want to be. And
sometimes it works out, like this year with Joe Alt. I mean, he was the third option at left tackle, right? But it ended up working out fourth. It ended up working out great. You know what I mean? So it can work.
Why wasn't he the second option?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. So sometimes it can work, but that's not a situation that you want to put yourself in. It's just it's just not good. So
yeah.
All right, Josh Miller with the question: if you could have one member of the coaching staff locked in for 10 years, who would it be? That's easy. It's Marcus Freeman.
Right. Okay, so let's okay. So that way we can kind of indulge the question a little bit.
Absolutely.
Let's then say, okay, Marcus Freeman's locked in for 10 years. He's the head coach, right? But what assistant would you want to say if that guy is guaranteed to be on the staff in 10 years, who would you want that to be?
I mean,
I know what Vince wants to say.
I know what I want to say, but I mean, he's going to be collecting AARP and,
I knew it. I knew you wanted to say East End.
So I will modify my answer and I will say Chris Watt because he's not technically an assistant.
That's a really
he's an
interesting
analyst,
one.
But because I want he's a disciple.
Well, he said what member of the coaching staff? That's technically part of the coaching staff. So that's fair.
Then I'm going with Chris Watt. That's my answer.
Fair. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to go offensive line coach. I would like to just have obviously I wish that we were at the point where we knew who the defensive coordinator was for sure. So that might change my answer potentially. But it wouldn't. You don't think so? Nah. All right. We'll go by default Harry Easton or Chris Watt. Sure. Let's do it.
I'm gonna say Al Washington.
You haven't seen him coach yet.
Huh? I know.
You haven't seen him coach.
I haven't seen Chris Watt coach yet either.
Well, all right.
The reason I say Al Washington because I feel like if Al Washington is here in 10 years, it means he's the defensive coordinator.
That's fair.
Meaning, because here's the thing about whoever the next defensive coordinator is.
Mm-hmm.
If Marcus Freeman makes the hire that I think he's going to make, one of two coaches that I believe he's going to make, both of them are if they do the job that I think they're capable of doing, are not going to be here that long, like maybe 3-4 years, and then they're going to be head coaches. If Al Washington's not here in 10 years, it's because of one of two reasons. One is he got a head coaching job somewhere, which is certainly possible.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's here in 10 years, it means he stayed. The new D coordinator had success. Al Washington steps in and he's the defensive coordinator. I think it's going to be tough to really have, and this is why I think I'll say the easy answer, but the one that makes the most sense is the offensive line coach, because Chris Watt is so young still. He's still in his 20s, I believe. At the end of the day, in 10 years, Mike Mickens is probably a head coach or a D coordinator somewhere. Al Washington's going to be a head coach somewhere. Deland McCullough's going to be almost 60 and a head coach somewhere. I'd be shocked if Chancey Stuckey's not, coordinator or in the NFL or something.
So long from
what I mean? Like, because if you look at Brian Kelly's first staff, there was one coach that made it to year 10, Mike Elston.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if there's anyone that I could see. Like Tommy Reese is not going to be here. I mean, you're hoping Tommy Reese is going to be here for 3 years.
Yeah.
He's going to be a head coach somewhere.
I think this conversation even gets more interesting if you say 5.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think all of our answers probably are the same. But
here's one. Brian Mason,
the special teams coordinator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe he's a guy. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, and honestly, if you're a head coach, you don't necessarily want a guy to be here for 10 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Look, a good head coach wants his coaches to get their opportunities to reach their goals.
Yep.
And their aspirations. Like,
want to make those jobs Tommy, more appealing.
Right. I know this for a fact. Tommy Reese was not at all upset about Lance Taylor and John McNulty leaving at all. Now, was he bummed that guys he respects and likes working with are leaving? Personally, yes. But professionally, he was happy for them because they're getting promotions to do things they ultimately want to do.
Right.
And good coaches are that way. Good coaches are like, look, I don't want – I mean, look, Mike Mickens and Marcus Freeman grew up together. You don't think Marcus Freeman wants Mike Mickens to reach his career goals? Now, maybe Mike Mickens' career goals are just to be Marcus Freeman's cornerbacks coach for the next 10 years. More often than not, though, it's I want to be a coordinator, I want to be a head coach, and those things. And it's good for your program when those things are happening. And I think that's ultimately where Coach Freeman and is going to be is, he wants Tommy Rees to get a head coaching job somewhere. It's just not until we've won a title together, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is like, right, I want Al Washington to be a head coach somewhere someday, but not until we've done certain things together.
Right.
And I think, and I think to your point is as much as I think the O line is easy because you can kind of have Harry Hiestand here in 10 years.
Exactly.
It's vicariously through
Like
Chris
Junior.
Watt. You know what I mean? So
yeah, absolutely.
A couple people in the chat said Bayless, and I think that's a good answer.
That's a great answer because he's technically part of the coaching staff. That's I didn't even think about that. That's a great
I didn't
answer.
either.
That's a great answer.
All right, boys, I'm gonna have to bow out.
Okay.
But with the starred ones, I've just been going right down the drain there. So, all right, everybody, have a great Friday. Have a great weekend.
See you, Vince.
Good. See you, Vince. Omar Austin, we haven't seen Omar in a little while here in the chat. Good to see Omar. I grew up in New Jersey, northern New Jersey. No Sean Marino put almost 400 yards on my high school in the state playoffs. Best I ever saw. Who is the best New Jersey recruit Ryan has seen play in person? It's a good one.
That's a good question. So a quick story, and then I'm going to actually give my answer. Okay. So there was a young man named Wesley Hills that played at Salem that ended up, he went to Delaware and ended up at Slippery Rock and spent a little time in the NFL. So the team I was coaching for, actually, he ran for over 400 yards against us and 8 touchdowns. He set the New Jersey record for rushing yards in a game, which was broken 12 minutes later that same day by Corey Clement out of Glassboro, who went to Wisconsin. But my real answer to this is coaching. The best that I've played, that I've coached against, and that's just kind of my direct knowledge here, would be Jonathan Taylor when he was at Salem. I coached against him in both football and track and field. I saw him run his 10.4 something at 210 pounds in the state track meet. And also coached against Palmyra High School that had Kelvin Harmon, who played at NC State and was drafted by the Washington Redskins at the time, now the Washington Commanders. And they also had Taj Harris, who was at Syracuse and now just transferred to Rutgers. But so it would be Jonathan Taylor was the best that I saw personally.
Okay. Who, what about anybody that you've seen from New Jersey that you didn't see live? Anybody that you kind of stands out?
I think so when I was a very young kid, and I don't really remember it too much, I saw Ron Dane play when he was, he went to belly fat. I think Overbrook or something was the school that he went to. I can't remember, but so he went there. Otherwise, I definitely have seen a couple North Jersey teams. Like I saw Devin Leary when he was at Timber Creek, who's a really good player at NC State. Can't really.
I liked him coming out of high school.
Yeah, no,
I liked him a lot coming out of high school.
Yeah, we saw. Yeah, he was awesome at Timber Creek. So saw him play. Never saw Jabril Peppers play. I know he was great, obviously in Jersey. So can't really think of anybody other than I think Jonathan Taylor would be the number one. Jonathan Taylor was just. I did not see Rashawn Gary. I actually, Joe DeLeon, who I do the podcast with. He actually played against Rashawn Gary when he was in middle school, apparently.
Nice.
And he said it wasn't too much fun, but as you can imagine.
I bet not.
But yeah, I remember it was just so unfair for Jonathan Taylor because if you're familiar with New Jersey football, so they are a Group 1 program, which is the lowest of the low, and he was playing against Group 1 football players in the state of New Jersey, which was wasn't too fair to say the least. So.
No, definitely not.
I did not see Winbush either. Did not see Winbush at St. Peter's, unfortunately.
Okay, so that means you also didn't see like Minka Fitzpatrick as well.
Did not see Minka. I saw highlight tapes. Never saw him live though. Never saw him live.
RJG Irving, Brian, knowing Coach Freeman's defensive philosophy, can you infer his likely offensive philosophy? I know Tommy Rees has the rudder, but Marcus Freeman is surely setting the course. I don't think Marcus Freeman is setting the course as much as people think, and I'm good with that. I think sometimes we get too wrapped up into, we need to run a spread or an air raid or whatever. I think Marcus Freeman has things that he wants from the offense. I want you to be dynamic. I want you to be explosive. I want you to be versatile. But how you get there, I don't care. That's why you hire people to do a job, right? Like, look, here's what we're going to be, right? I need you guys to score a lot of points. I need you to be explosive, and I need you to be dynamic. But I don't think he's saying, hey, we're going to be an 11 personnel team and we're going to run zone and misdirection and we're going to run this many play actions a game. I don't think he has an offensive philosophy in that regard. So to that really micro level, I think his his desires on offense are more macro. You better recruit the best players in the country, and you've got to go out and score points. That's where we need to be. And when Tommy Reese's time comes to leave, hopefully for a head coaching job somewhere someday, which if he leaves for a head coaching job, that means he'll be here at least more than hopefully a year or two. But I don't think he's going to say, well, I got to go hire a guy that does exactly what Tommy Reese does. It's like, hey, look, let me hire someone that fits our program, that will be able to adapt to the players that we have, that will be able to do exactly what I tasked Tommy Reese with doing, which is score a lot of points and, build the offense around what our kids do best. I think that's a big, big thing for Marcus Freeman is that part right there, as it should be. So I don't think he necessarily has like you have to do this when it comes to offensive philosophy. Anything you'd like to add to that, Ryan?
No, I was just going to say it from a head coaching perspective. I would think that the philosophy would be more of, like you said, recruiting. How do I build this program? That type of thing. And obviously, there was a push for Tommy Reese to leave Notre Dame. So if you were able to obviously convince him to come back and stay a part of the program, a part of the new transition, I would think that you wouldn't want to multi-manage that too much, right? Like I'm sure that he has some trust in what Coach Reese's philosophy is offensively, and I would hope that that's a push towards I'm here, but I trust the people under me to do the jobs that I'm hiring them for.
Right. And that's kind of what changed for Brian Kelly the last 5-6 years. Is he finally just said defensively, I'm just going to go hire a really good coach and let him do the job. Mm-hmm. And that's when the defense started getting even better. Instead of because like the problem with Van Gorder was he decided we're going to run this type of defense. And let me go find a guy that can do that. And it was Van Gorder. As opposed to, okay, we've got to have he when he hired Mike Elko, it was more of a macro thing. We've got to be fast and we've got to do this. And then you go out and hire a guy, and then he just let Mike Elko coach, and then he let Clark Lee coach, and he let Marcus Freeman coach, and then he focused on the offense. And I think that's kind of what you do is like, look, I need you to make stops. I need you to be athletic and aggressive and all that. So the philosophy is going to be more on a macro level, RJ, and that I think that'll be where the focus is. Joseph Sergey, here's a couple for you, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Two-part question from Joseph. Number one is, what does running back recruiting look like now with our new running backs coach? That would be Dylan McCullough, who it was officially announced today that he is going to be the new running backs coach in Notre Dame. And then question number two is, are there any big-time backs that Notre Dame now has a chance with?
I think the pecking order of running backs is still the same. They're shooting for a guy like a Justice Haynes, who's a top level, top 50 type running back, right?
David Solomon here says that Joseph talking about a good question. Can McCullough take things to another level with Justice Haynes? So I think that kind of fits into what you were getting ready to talk about, Ryan.
Yeah, and so I think that there's I think the coaching staff now has some more ties into Georgia, right? Which I think will be huge for that recruitment. If you ask me today, I still think that Justice Haynes is going to be a tough pull out of the South, right? Like I think especially the University of Georgia, like there's a lot of interest there. He's been there multiple times. So I think it's a tough pull to say the least, but I still think that they like Jaden Lamar out there in Washington. He's more of he's a smaller back, but used heavily in the passing game. I think he can kind of do things from a space perspective. That's a little different than a Cedric Urban Jr. Obviously, they still have Cedric, who is full go for Notre Dame, which is a good running back and a good starting point. So I think they're going to continue to kick the tires with some higher level guys. Justice Haynes is definitely the top of the board, and they're not going to stop. They're going to keep going after him. But today, I would say I don't know how much movement it's done, and we won't know honestly because Coach McCullough just got on the job. Right, we need to see what the waves are that he makes on the recruiting side of it. But I do think right now where we are, that Justice Haynes would be a tough pull for Notre Dame.
And I don't think a second back is a must in this class. Right. I don't think they're going to take a second back just to take a second back. I think if they take a second back, it's because they lose someone from the current roster down the road, or B, it's just a kid like a Justice Haynes that they just view as too good to pass up. So I don't think it's a given that they're going to take a second back. I hope that they just kind of shoot for a guy that they think is really, really good. And if they don't get him, then move on to next year, because this isn't a great running back class, in my opinion, nationally. It's not. There's not a lot of guys that I've seen so far. I mean, there's some like Richard Young's really good, but it's not a great running back class.
Yeah.
I don't know if 24 is any better. I haven't had a chance to really dive into it, but I this isn't the year I'm reaching to take a second back, in my opinion. I'm really not. So, yeah, it's a good question, Joseph. I like that, but I think for Coach McCullough, I'm more looking to see how he impacts the 24 and 25 classes. I think is where we're going to see more of an impact. Truman Dumel asks, how big of a get is this for our defense and Notre Dame overall? So Truman joined the show late, Ryan. This is a question about Preston Zinter.
Yeah. So like we talked about a little bit, I think that we both, and you can correct me if I'm you misspeaking here, Brian. I think we both think that he's a top 250 caliber player with upside to being more than that. It's a little bit of a projection because Notre Dame is did recruit him and the possibilities of playing Mike linebacker, but at his school, he has played a 3-4 outside linebacker spot where he's played in space a ton. He's rushed the quarterback on the line of scrimmage. So he hasn't been in the traditional Mike role. So you haven't seen him there, but from a physical perspective, we're talking 6'3" with good length. We're talking a good athlete overall, can change direction in space. So all the boxes kind of check to being, obviously into that Mike mold. So I think it's a really nice get in the senses of, hey, we got a 250 caliber kid when we already have Notre Dame when Notre Dame already has a Drake Bowen in the class, which is a legitimate top 50 caliber linebacker. So you have added to that linebacker room where last year we got the 4-man class of Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler, Tuli Alamaka, and I'm missing one guy, and Burnham, of course. How can I forget Joshua Burnham? So you got a star-studded 2022 class for Notre Dame, Prince Collie the year before. So it's been a tremendous couple years for the linebacker position. And I think Zinter is he's a great addition to the class because of all the things I've already mentioned. And also I think that he's a really good pairing with a Drake Bowen because I think they're very different football players. And I think that they can play together very well.
All right, let's go to this next question here. With the rumors last month that App State tried to schedule a game with Notre Dame during the COVID season, what would be the odds of Notre Dame scheduling a home-and-home series with App State? I have no idea what the odds are. I wouldn't mind seeing Notre Dame schedule App State in a home-and-home. You just have to understand that the home-and-home is not going to be played in Boone, North Carolina. There's no way App State plays that game in Boone, North Carolina. There's no way Notre Dame's going to go to Boone, North Carolina. The reason that I say that is, I mean, let me just look this up because this is just kind of how these things go, right? It's like whenever, like I was talking to my wife yesterday, we were kind of going over the travel schedule for the 2022 season. And we talked about Syracuse, and I said, I've always kind of wanted to cover a game in the Carrier Dome just because I grew up, watching Marvin Graves playing in the Carrier Dome, Don McNabb, then basketball games in the Carrier Dome, Billy Owens and Derek Coleman and Sherman Douglas and Adrian Autry. I mean, it's just kind of what I grew up on. It'd just be kind of cool to do it. The problem is every time Notre Dame has, looked to play a game there, it's like since what, I think 2004, every time they're going to play Syracuse on the road, Syracuse moves the game to MetLife or one of the New Jersey, where the Giants or Jets play. Why? A lot more people, and they get a bigger payday. Sure. And I'm looking at it now. The stadium at App State holds 30,000 people, right? So if you're them, okay, yes, it would be cool to kind of have a game there against Notre Dame and all the other kind of stuff. But if you were to move the game to Charlotte, for example, right, home of the Carolina Panthers, all of a sudden you're in a stadium that's what, Ryan? I'm pulling up their stadium now. It's going to be stadium capacity is 70, right? 75,000. Yeah. That's 45,000 more tickets that you're going to be able to sell if you play that game in Charlotte. So that's why Wake Forest was going to reschedule their game. Notre Dame was supposed to play was it last year? They were going to play at Wake, but they'd change it to Charlotte. They're going to move it to Charlotte. Why? Because make a lot more money. Makes sense. And, and it's easier for Notre Dame people to get to Charlotte than it is to get to Winston-Salem or Boone or wherever else. So here's an interesting question for you, Ryan. I'm going to have you touch this one. Okay. What's the difference between a Cam McDaniel and Will Shipley?
Talent? I'm sorry. That was a mean thing to say. Cam, I liked Cam, man, because he was a tough, no nonsense runner. You know, he would get downhill and he was a dependable player. Will Shipley just has a much different gear, right? It's just a different talent level than a Cam McDaniel versus a Will Shipley. I mean, that's just as easy as I could say is that Shipley is just a different type of athlete than a Cam McDaniel.
Yeah, just faster, more sudden,
explosive,
more dynamic.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that Cam McDaniel and Will Shipley have in common is height and skin color. That's it.
Yeah, white
they're
running
completely
backs.
different players.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, that's the only thing they have in common is they're both white. Will Shipley's a really, really talented, high-level football player. Cam was a great try-hard kid, and he had some ability. I mean, Cam could have gone to a North Texas, a Texas San Antonio, and been a 1,000-yard running back. I mean, he was a good football player, but Will Shipley's an excellent football player, in my opinion, and did some good things this year for Clemson despite playing behind a garbage offensive line.
Yes.
I mean, garbage offensive line. So he's going to be a good football player. He's going to be a really good football player.
I love the chat, by the way. There's some great conversations going back and forth.
So Tyler Bedwell, I would really like to see Notre Dame lock down state of Indiana. It isn't a state that is loaded with talent, but the ones who are highly rated, they need to get. And Chris Ayers says, Tyler, I got killed for even bringing that up earlier. Chris, that's not what you brought up. You said Notre Dame needs to sign a bunch of kids from Central Indiana. No one has ever said if there's a great player from Indiana, don't get him. We've actually said the opposite. When there is a Notre Dame caliber player in Indiana, you have to get him. But you don't take a kid who's not a Notre Dame caliber kid because he's from Indiana. That's not what you do. Now, what I would say is if you have two kids that are sort of like depth players and one's from Oklahoma or Georgia and one's from Indiana, take the Indiana kid if he can get into school. But look, no one's ever said not to get the best players from the state of Indiana if they're Notre Dame caliber kids. Some years, there's not going to be any Notre Dame caliber kids from Indiana. So Notre Dame should just take a kid because he's from Indiana? No. And I don't think that's what Tyler's saying either. I think Tyler's saying is it's, when they're ones who are highly rated, they need to get. I would push back on that a little bit because I don't care where they're ranked. I care about their talent. I'll take Ashton Craig over Caden Curry any day of the week as a prospect when you project what they're going to be in college. Ashton Craig's a 3-star recruit. Caden Curry's a top 100 recruit. There's a reason Notre Dame didn't spend any time recruiting Caden Curry, or hardly any. And there's a reason they wanted Ashton Craig, because they're projecting to the next level. I don't care that Blake Fisher was highly ranked. It just so happened that his ranking matched his talent, right? Yeah. And so you go get him. Zach Martin wasn't super highly ranked when Notre Dame got him, right? Nick Martin wasn't very highly ranked when they got him. When there's a kid that is a Notre Dame caliber player in Indiana, you have to get him. But the reality is there's kids in Indiana that are high caliber players that they just can't get. Trust me, Notre Dame wanted David Bell. Just couldn't get him in school, right? Now, to the point is that we brought up George Karlaftis earlier. There's an Indiana kid, Ryan, that you and I talk about all the time. I shouldn't say you and I, talk about him all the time. It's Jesse Bates. Yeah. Right? True. I mean, he's a 3-star kid. He's a Fort Wayne, though. Like, you've got to identify that kid. You've got to get that kid, right? And so, yes, if there are Notre Dame caliber kids in Indiana, you have to see them, identify them, and land them. Well, I was going to say you don't take kids just because they're there.
Right. Yeah. No, I was just going to say that you definitely have to identify, because I know Karlaftis always obviously had the Purdue ties, right? But when that, because he was a lot. Yeah, and he was a highly rated kid too. So it's just, I know that the staff just did not quite see him to what he is now, obviously. But you have to be able to identify the talent in the state for sure, and you have to pull those kids in, like the Blake Fishers, obviously, the Drake Bowens, and the George Karlaftis. Like, you got to get those kids to come to Notre Dame.
Tyler Eifert, Zach Martins, Jalen Smiths, yes, of course.
And Tyler Eifert was also not a highly ranked kid, but like you have to identify those kids.
The funny thing is they weren't going to take him at first. Here's a funny story. They thought Jake Golick was better than Tyler Eifert in that same class.
Oh, Golick, yeah.
And so Tyler came to camp and was like, because he wanted to be at Notre Dame. Tyler Eifert wanted to be at Notre Dame. So he came to their summer camp and dominated. And that's why Notre Dame offered him a scholarship. They already had a commit from Jake Golick. So that was kind of funny because it was the same class. They wanted, I'm trying to remember, do you remember the kid from Michigan that ended up getting drafted by the Broncos. His last name started with an S. Goodness gracious. But he was a kid from Michigan, and that's who Notre Dame wanted in the 09 class. And they ended up not – they knew they weren't going to get him, and that's when they turned to Zach Martin. So two of the best kids in that class that Notre Dame got, they didn't originally want, right? So that kind of gets down to the whole – you've got to properly identify who the best players are. And they didn't do that all the time. Like they took John Turner. There's no reason you should have taken John Turner. That was just not a smart decision, in my opinion. Michael Schofield, that's who it was.
They ended up playing offensive tackle?
They wanted Michael Schofield over Zach Martin early on. And it wasn't until they realized they weren't going to get Schofield, he was going to go to Michigan, that they turned to Zach Martin. And that's how they got Zach Martin. So
Schofield ended up being a good player too. So that's interesting.
He wasn't Zach Martin.
No, obviously not. Yes.
Here's a good one. John Rich asks your opinions. Can each of you name 3 players who had 3-star or lower grades entering ND who turned out to way outperform their ratings?
I can do this. I just named one, Tyler Eifert. I'm going to stick with that one. I believe he was a 3-star kid, if I remember that. Will Fuller's the obvious one, right? He's the guy.
Some had him as a 4-star or 3-star.
Okay.
Like now, Rivals had him in the top 200.
Okay.
But ESPN had here's the crazy thing. Remember, we've been saying a lot of dumb things that ESPN's done. They had Will Fuller as the lowest ranked position player in the 2013 recruiting class for Notre Dame.
That's crazy.
That's just dumb. It's like when you make mistakes that bad, it's like you just gotta.
Yeah.
You gotta. I'm gonna see what his composite ranking was, so to see if he fits into your category, Ryan.
Well, my last one was Adi Ogundeji, right? Was a Western Michigan guy that Notre Dame flipped, right? So that would be one. Wasn't Cam Hart a little lower rated, or am I wrong there?
He was definitely a 3-star. He was like in the 600s, I believe.
Yeah.
Of the final rankings. I'm actually going to look that up, but he was very low ranked, and he turned out to be pretty good.
Someone said in the chat Julian Love, which is another one, right? Like, yeah,
he ended up being a 4-star player. I mean, I think if we're going to talk about, and everybody knows kind of my opinion on him and different things like that. But if we're going to talk about a 3-star kid that outperformed his rating, you have to throw Ian Book into that conversation.
True,
in my opinion. Look, was he a great player? No, he was not a great player. But Ian Book got a lot. I mean, he got a lot more out of his career than people would have otherwise thought. I mean, how many kids are 3-star kids or 3-year starters at Notre Dame and go to the playoff twice?
Right.
I think if I'm being fair, I have to throw him into that conversation. Julian Love, I think, ended up being a composite 4-star player. And that's the thing that's so weird about this. Like some people he was a 3-star. So he was a 3-star. Because I believe Rivals had him as a 3-star, but 247 Sports had him as the 16th best player in the state of Illinois coming out of his class. So I think Julian Love has to be. So I mean, the 3 obvious ones to me are those 3. But there's another guy that I want to bring up. Cam Hart was the number 644 player in the country coming out of his class. But there was another one. Because I know that one service had Jeremiah Wusu as a 3-star, but yes, overall, Jeremiah Wusu-Cormo was a 3-star recruit. He was the number 456 player in the country, and 247 Sports had him as a 3-star for sure. I think only ESPN's the only one that had him as a 4-star, but it was as an unranked 4-star. But that on the composite, he was the number 17 player in the state of Virginia coming out of high school. So Love, so think about that. Some of Notre Dame's best players of the last 10 years were 3-star recruits, and not that they were best for Notre Dame, but like they were all-American dudes. Yeah, Tyler Eifert, Julian Love, Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue. It's kind of hard to argue with those guys. You know what I mean? Like, it's impressive.
And I guess your mind can go to like obviously the walk-ons that turned out to be something, right? Like Joe Schmidt and Chris Fink, obviously were low-rated guys that ended up.
Nick Martin was also a 3-star. He ended up being a second-round draft pick. Mike McGlinchey ended up being a 4-star, but there were some people that had him as a 3-star. Seriously, like there were some people that ranked him as a 3-star recruit.
Yeah, I remember just kind of following along in that class. I remember he was very lowly rated for a long time by most people.
He bumped up at the end. Like I know 247 bumped him up late, and Scout had him in the top 200. But he was a 3-star for a lot of that recruitment, a lot of his recruitment. So there's a decent amount of guys that have been that, John, that have been 3-star players have turned out to be. I mean, if we were going to sit here and could keep talking about it, we could find more. I was thinking Drew Tranquil, but he was a 4-star. Drew was a top 300 player coming out of high school. So there's other guys we can. Kyron Williams.
True.
Kyron Williams is a 3-star recruit coming out of high school. So it's now that I think about it, it's kind of like it's going to be kind of hard to pick just 3. We've named some All-American dudes on there. So there's been a lot of those kids that have turned out to be darn good football players. No, I stand corrected. Kyron was a 4-star on the composite ranking, but he was the number 367 player in the country. So he bumped up late as well. Although I believe Rivals had him as a 3-star, if I remember correctly. And I'll be honest with you, that's one that I missed. I had him as one of the Rivals had him as 3-star. I had him as one of the lower plays in the kids in the class. I said, look, I think the kid's a good football player. I didn't think the projection was there because of his size. That was my big concern with Kyron Williams. I didn't see his game translating to college, and I was wrong on that. He turned out to be a much better player than I thought he was going to be. No doubt about it. And then I'm going to kind of flip this. Who was the guy that you saw coming into Notre Dame that you're like, this guy is going to be a dude, and ended up just doing nothing? Like not even like a Javon McKinley, who I thought was going to be really good, but he didn't really break out till the end. I'm talking about a guy just did nothing. It's easy for me. It's Josh Barajas. I thought Josh Barajas was going to be really good, and he drank himself off the team basically. But yeah, that was the one for me. That was by far my biggest miss.
Shaq Williams is one that popped into my head real quick. I thought he was going to be something special.
I would have liked to have seen what he could have done in that in that final year had he not got kicked off the team. Because remember, he was supposed to be a senior in 2014, and he got kicked off the team with Kavari and DeVaris.
Yeah, I see people putting in the chat. Obviously, the quarterbacks are always going to come to mind, right? Like Dane Chris, Gunnar Keel. But I mean, those make sense, obviously.
But see, Gunnar had a 3,000-yard season in his career. I mean, Gunnar was actually, in my opinion, a good player at Cincinnati until he got that really violent concussion. He was never the same player after that. But if you look at Gunnar Keel's, I think, first year in the starting lineup at Cincinnati, he had some really impressive stats, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, he did. He did. Someone just put in, this is my answer. I thought Max Redfield was going to be a guy. And he was a solid player, when he played, but he wasn't nearly the player I thought he was going to be.
Yeah. He's another guy. How would he have done in this final year if he didn't get kicked off the team? Like, would he have changed that, Gunnar Keel in his first year as a starting quarterback at Cincinnati threw for 3,254 yards, 8.3 yards per attempt, 31 touchdowns, and 13 picks at Cincinnati. That's not bad at all. Late in that year, he had a really devastating concussion, and he was gun shy after that, which I'm not going to lie to you. I get that. I get that. I certainly can understand that. But yeah, Josh Barajas for me is the one that I missed on. I missed on big time. Hey, I want to throw this up there too. Matt Last, thank you for putting this out there. He said, former Notre Dame player Jamion Franklin, who is a great kid. If you don't know Jamion's an awesome kid. He has a GoFundMe asking for help for his family. His dad was diagnosed with leukemia 4 years ago and beat it, by the way, which is awesome. And his mom was just diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. So that is not a good situation. So definitely keep Jamion in your prayers. But if you're willing, I don't know if – I haven't seen this, so I'm taking Matt at his word for it. Let me see if I can find it because I know Jamion a little bit. So let me see if I can find that link and I can put it in the chat if we can. So I'm going to try to find this and see if I can find the GoFundMe. Okay, here it is. I found the GoFundMe page, and I'm gonna put it in the the chat. So it's gonna be down there. Let me see if that works for everybody to be able to pull that up. Ryan, can you test that real quick and just see if that pops up for you?
Yep, test it right now.
Okay. Let's see if that
It's only
works.
it's only going to let me. I don't think it's going to work on my end because it just lets me show.
Okay.
Like it won't let me.
Then what I'll do is I'll put the tweet in there that has the link in it and see if that works. So see if that works. Okay. So hopefully that works. But yes,
someone said it
Jamie
works.
on. Yep. Yeah. So keep Jamie on your prayers. And if you're able and willing, then obviously his family could use some help. But, Jamion's a good kid. I don't know, obviously he transferred and all that, but I've been able to stay in touch with Jamion since he left Notre Dame, and he's a really, really good kid. Really good kid. All right, here we go. Let me see if we got a few more of these before we get out of here. Ryan, can you go through and as I pull these up, see if you can maybe find a few more to star if there's some more questions in there. Matt, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Gideon Rosa asked, do you have any indication if Keon is trending towards decommitting? You want to go ahead and give your thoughts on that?
It's I know it's obviously a huge talking point, but I think that Notre Dame is in the same spot that they were with Keon when he committed. I think that Keon is going to take some visits, but I don't have any reason to expect a decommitment. I think that Keon fits every piece of what makes someone successful at Notre Dame, so I'm not worried about that right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get down here. Domer Grizz. I love this question. I'm going to let you take this one, Ryan.
Okay.
All right. If a guy like Tom Brady wants to get into coaching, does he have to be a GA first? And it is common for such high-profile players to become coaches. So there's two parts to that. Let's take the second one first, because I think that's the easiest, about high-profile players becoming coaches, because the answer is no. They don't.
No, not usually.
They'll do things like Elway, getting into the ownership
or the media side. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So no, it's not very common. I think somebody after this put, like Deion Sanders is one, right? But I think Deion was even coaching high school ball, right, for a little bit before he took on Jackson State, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I think so.
So, and I mean, to go into the first part, if we can for a second, like you're never going to see Tom Brady as a GA. I can guarantee that you're never going to see him as a GA.
He's not eligible. They've changed the rule to where it's like 7 years after. I mean, Tom Brady's like several decades out of being it, because what was happening, and I think it's a stupid rule, but you were getting all these former NFL players that were older and coming back and being GAs, and so they didn't like that, which for some stupid, like some of the arbitrary things the NCAA gets worked up about, like. It's just so ignorant, but whatever. Yeah. If a guy's 35 and he's been out of college for 13 years and he's willing to take a job as a GA, why are we not letting that happen? Like, that's just so ignorant, but whatever. It's the NCAA, so what should we expect?
So, I mean, to answer the question directly, right? Like, it's not common, obviously. If Tom Brady wanted to be a coach, though, I think a college football team would just give him a job without even any prior coaching experience, to be honest with you, because that's just where he is, right? NFL wise, I don't think an NFL team would hire him as a head, even though Josh McCown got an interview for an NFL head coaching position. So I guess anything's possible, but that
would have been such a train wreck. When you first told me that, I think I was down in Arizona at the time and I almost ran off the road. I was like, no, they're not about to do that.
Yeah. So what's funny, Brian, is everybody was obviously had the backlash of, oh my God, you're interviewing Josh McCown. And then some people were so underwhelmed by the Lovie Smith thing that they're like, oh, you should have hired Josh McCown instead.
Yeah. Yeah. That was not good. That was not good. Okay. Let me get down here to this. And here we go. Somebody talking about the 3-star. I think this is about the 3-star thing. How about a guy named Tommy Rees?
Never heard of him.
I mean, you're going to put Tommy Rees in your conversation for the best 3 stars when we're talking about, we named 3 All-Americans and a first-round pick, a second-round pick, a fourth-round pick, another second-round pick, a fifth-round pick, Ian Book, fourth-round pick. You know what I mean? Like, not that the NFL is the end-all, be-all, but, I mean, I think I could say this: Tommy Rees got everything out of his ability at Notre Dame. Like, if you're going to look at it from that regards, like, did Tommy Rees as a 3-star get the most out of his ability at Notre Dame? I'd say absolutely. Absolutely he did. I mean, the guy was a multi-year starter and ended his career like second or third all time in just about every passing category as a 3-star, but he wasn't a great player. And I think that's the difference between even Ian Book. Why, now that I look at it, like Ian Book should be in the conversation, but if I'm picking these guys, I'm end up, as we work through it, I'm not taking him because Eifert was a great player. Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah was a great player. Julian Love was a great player. Not just did they get the most out of their ability, it was like Tommy Reese was a not real talented kid. He'll tell you that got the most out of his ability. I think Eifert, Love, and JOK were just late bloomers, like late developers. And Julian Love was just a miss, I think, by people. I had him as a 4-star coming out. I don't know why he wasn't. He should have been a 4-star. That was just a recruiting miss. But Eifert and JOK are that typical of it's the ceiling, right? There's a reason Tyler Eifert didn't play as a freshman because he wasn't very big. He eventually grew into that frame. Same with Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. He didn't play as a freshman because he wasn't ready. Whereas a Jalen Smith comes in and he is ready right away. And a lot of times that can be a difference between a 3-star and a 5-star. And somebody said, I think Lewis Nix may have been too. Lewis Nix was not a 5-star recruit. He was a 4-star recruit. One service even had him in the top 100. So yeah, he was definitely a 4-star recruit. Okay, here we got a few more here. See here, Lewis Saban. Brian, in your opinion, who are those two coaches? That was about the D coordinator. R. Riley also said, I have a question, but doubt it will be answered off of YouTube chat. Who is Notre Dame's next DC? Who is in the running for the DC job? Is Minnesota DC in the running? So as far as I know, there are still 4 coaches that are being considered. That'd be Al Golden, Doug Belk, Joe Rossi from Minnesota, Doug Belk from Houston, and Tem Lakuba from Boston College. I believe the 2 most likely candidates, in my opinion, are Al Golden and Joe Rossi from Minnesota. And so I think ultimately the choice will come down to those 2. Which one it'll be, I don't know. I think the thing that I've kind of talked, Ryan, you and I have talked about this off the air. The thing I've said to you is a lot of people are assuming it's going to be Al Golden. Number one, Al Golden hasn't been formally offered the job, and it's not a given that he's going to take the job, right? So I think there's this assumption that they're just waiting on the Super Bowl to be over to name Al Golden as the D coordinator. That may happen, but that's not what they're waiting on. Like there's other things at play here than just that. So.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of assumptions that have been made about this D coordinator search that are incorrect. And So I want to say this. R. Riley said, I hope it's not Golden, only because he has not called plays for a while, and there will be some rust, and we have Ohio State. We need to be at our peak.
It's fair.
I will say this. The gap between when Al Golden called plays and arrived at Notre Dame would be much narrower than the time from when Clark Lee called plays before, because the answer to that is never. And Clark Lee never called plays before until he got it. I keep telling people, listen, is there some concern about, a guy that hasn't called plays? Well, sure, there's some, but with spring ball and summer, that's worked out. If you got the ability, you got the ability, folks. And the thing about being assistant coach is you're involved in the process of putting a game plan together. And if you're on a good staff, you're involved in play calling. There's been some rumblings and articles saying that like Al Golden was the primary play caller on like 3rd down. I don't know how true that is, so he was making decisions. I don't know how true that is. But if you got the chops, you got the chops. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I mean, I'm not as concerned about that, to be honest with you. So, yeah. So here's an interesting one, Ryan. See if you have an opinion on this or not. Toe Jam 1992 says, how badly does Zinter committing to Notre Dame reflect on Harbaugh and the Michigan Skunk Bears, considering Zinter's brother plays there and included himself in the commitment press conference? So I want to remind you first, before Ryan gives his opinion, to touch on the last part. Ryan made this clear at the beginning that the brother being at Michigan was not going to play a factor. Preston was going to, and this is more often than not the case, even when brothers go together, barring them being twins. Like Julian Ekwar didn't come to Notre Dame because Romeo did. This is where he wanted to be. Just, like it ended up being the same decision, but it wasn't because of Romeo. The only 2 times I can remember brothers picking the same school because they wanted to play together was the Adamiolas, obviously, and then the other one was the Martins.
Yeah.
So, like the Golics, but it's not because they wanted to play together. They wanted to play with their dad and their uncles, and the whole family played. But anyway, so the rest of the question, Ryan, if you want to if you want to address this, because I have an opinion on this as well, but I want you to go ahead and give you a shot.
I mean, my first thought is like Brian said, right? Like it wasn't, this is directly from his coach too. Like Michigan never had like an inside track. This wasn't on Preston's mind that like he wanted to follow his brother to Michigan. Is it a reflection negatively? I mean, I would say no. I don't think it's a reflection negatively per se, because you don't know what the state of the Michigan recruiting as far as like how hard they were pushing. You don't know their perspective on where they valued him, what position they valued him at. Like there's just a lot of layers to the Michigan side of it. So I wouldn't say that it's I don't think it's a negative reflection per se. I just think it's a young man that had his ideals and what he considered to be the forefront of what's important to him. And I think Notre Dame just made more sense to him.
Yeah. You nailed it. Yeah, I don't think this reflects negatively on Michigan. I think this because again, as we said earlier, if Notre Dame would have opened the door to Zinter and taken his commitment, he wanted to commit to Notre Dame. They wouldn't take his commitment, which, looking back, hindsight 2020 was not a great idea.
Yeah.
Scott McDonald with the question: can Notre Dame coaches' kids go for free if they qualify academically since they work for the school? More specifically, Dealin's kids or they need a scholarship. I'd like to get some clarity on this, but I think there's been a rule change in the last decade where you only go to school for free if you've worked there for a certain number of time, but if you haven't, it's like just partial. I'll have to get the full answer on this, but I don't think so. But look, if his kids are good enough to play at Notre Dame, like for example, Deshaun McCullough, he's the 2022 kid. He's a Notre Dame caliber player. If he wants to come to Notre Dame, I think you should give him a scholarship. I mean, I because I don't believe it would be a full ride. I don't. That's why I think they put Ron Paulus the third on scholarship, because it's not a full ride. I don't believe. But I'll look into this because I've had people ask this question before. Here we go. Rob Thidoff, thank you for this question. Rob, your thoughts on Notre Dame end zone facelift? I'm thinking painting the end zones gold with green shamrocks with years of winning the national titles within those shamrocks. Brian, what do you think of his idea? And then what do you think about changing the end zone? Because I have a strong opinion on this.
Notre Dame just strikes me as a very traditionalist school, right? Like I honestly don't want to change much. We talked about, the Golden Dome, right? Like we don't want to cover that up with any, any crazy decals or anything. So, I mean, the Shamrock with representing national titles is interesting. It's different to say the least, but I think I'm just a traditionalist, especially with the school Notre Dame, the tradition they have.
I would change the end zones because there are some things that I think are tradition that shouldn't change, and I think some things I'm totally fine with. Like I think about like who established the tradition, right? It's like Newt Rockne, and Newt was an innovative guy. He was like, let's stay ahead of the game. He wasn't like we've been doing this since Jess Harper, so let's keep doing it, right? Like I think it's kind of like the scoreboard thing. Well, Newt didn't have a scoreboard. Well, Newt would have had a scoreboard if they had scoreboards back then, right? Like he would have been the first person to put a big old promoting scoreboard up there because that's just kind of how he was. To me, I don't think that necessarily takes away from the tradition. I'm sympathetic to your argument, Ryan. I don't think there's anything wrong with what you're saying. I get it completely. But I think the thing I like about Rob's so I wouldn't do what Rob was going to do, right? Like I would just kind of put Notre Dame in one and Irish in the other, and I would have it be a blue one with white and gold or, that kind of thing. And, maybe put a shamrock in there. But I do kind of like the idea of on the Irish side, like listing on the outside, like, maybe 5 on one side, 5 on the other. And then 1988 somewhere in the middle. I think that'd be kind of cool. But, not because then that would kind of be implementing the tradition a little bit. But I would love to see Notre Dame get it. I mean, because look, traditionally, they never had an interlocking ND at midfield either. Right. So it's like,
it's fair.
I get why they have the lines, but to me, like that I'd be fine. I think I guess there's other things you could do to represent that than just having it in the end zone. But I personally would, that's one of those traditional things that I wouldn't necessarily be too upset if they change and would probably push for it. It's up to me. But if they don't change it, it's not like some kid, why'd you pick Michigan over Notre Dame? Michigan has painted end zones and Notre Dame doesn't. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, for me, aesthetically watching on TV or whatever, I just think it makes it look cooler. but I don't think it's moving the needle. It's not like a Ryan, you're missing the boat, recruiting director. This is going to this is what's going to make Dante Moore come to Notre Dame. No. If Dante Moore came to Notre Dame because they had painted end zones, I'd say this is not a kid mature enough to become a Notre Dame, right? Like, that's not why he's going to decide to come to Notre Dame or not come to Notre Dame. But it would be kind of funny because, someone's going to, that's because they don't, okay, whatever. But I like that idea of the Green Shamrocks with the years they've won titles. That could be really interesting. Really interesting. I dig it. I dig it, Rob. All right. Gideon Rosa. I don't know that I would trade Shipley for any of our current running backs. I mean, I'm not going to get into this. I don't like doing the whole trading thing because I think Notre Dame's got good players. Look, I wouldn't trade Shipley for any of Notre Dame's running backs because he had a chance to come to Notre Dame and chose not to. They had a chance to go somewhere else, and they chose to come to Notre Dame. I'm going to take the kid that chose to come to Notre Dame any day of the week as opposed to the kid who had the chance and didn't take it. So that's why I wouldn't do it. But as a player, look, Will Shipley's a heck of a running back. And if Will Shipley came to Notre Dame and one of the Notre Dame backs went to Clemson, you'd be saying the same thing about I wouldn't trade Will Shipley for any of Clemson's running backs kind of thing. Like, look, Notre Dame's fine at running back. They recovered well. They're fine at running back. But that doesn't mean that Will Shipley wouldn't have been really good on this team as well, in my opinion. That's just my 2 cents, Ryan. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that.
No, I agree because I was going to answer it, and then I was just kind of like, I don't want to downplay Notre Dame's talent that they have at the position, but certainly Will Shipley would fit in well, and he would obviously be deserving of a spot. Like, he's a very talented player.
He'd be getting touches. We're talking about the differences between Will Shipley and Cam Hart, and Shanty Irishman said Cam is better looking. Okay, can't disagree with that. Can't disagree with that. Right? Cam had one of the best all-time still shots ever. Like that time where he's at USC and his helmet gets knocked off and he says this total chill face on. Okay, I might get killed here, but it's all good. Laker Irish asks, why didn't we recruit Keontae Goodwin out of Charleston, Indiana? Ended up at Kentucky. He couldn't get into school. It's pretty simple. Keith Wiegand, is Caden Fegan still on Notre Dame's board, and what position? Once again, take that one, Ryan.
He's still on the board. They still want him at running back if he ends up at Notre Dame. I just don't. They're not pushing for him right now. But he's on the board, yes, and there is interest. Like Brian said, though, I don't know. I feel like with Cedric Irvin Jr. already in the class, they're taking a shot at the big fish right now, and I don't know if I don't think Caden Fegan's the guy that they definitely want in the class necessarily. They're shooting for guys like Justice Haynes right now.
Yeah, I think that they like Caden. I think they're doing a good job of keeping him on the board, but I think you're right, Ryan. I don't think he's a guy that they're pushing for right now. Yeah. All right. Next in line, we have a super chat from Mike Huff. Mike says, this is the classic kid. He's talking about Preston Zinter. This is the classic kid who starts at Mike over all these superstar kids. I love this pickup. Yeah, and look, this isn't like a 3-star kid that they're beating out. No. Oh, wow, they beat Rutgers or BC for this kid, right? Like, this kid had offers from Michigan, Penn State. I mean, this kid had I'm going to actually pull it up right now because this kid had a pretty impressive offer list, right? And the schools that were not just offering him but pushing for him. I mean, Penn State wanted him. He had an offer from Auburn. He had an offer from Georgia. He had an offer from LSU. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he was a take at all those schools. I'm not making that case, but they clearly saw enough of him. He had an offer from Ohio State, Penn State, Nebraska, Ole Miss, Michigan, USC, Wisconsin. That's he's had, let me see, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 SEC offers. Yeah, all the big northern powers offered him. Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, right? Nebraska offered him, and then you go out to USC offered him. How often does USC come out to Massachusetts for a kid, right?
Great question.
I'm with you, Mike. I think this is a kid who isn't getting the love, people. There's the stars debate. I think the thing that you have to understand about stars, the stars are just a tool that I would encourage you to use if you're not someone who can dive into the film or wants to dive into the film. And you value stars, fine. I have my opinion on stars. You have yours. I'm not going to change your mind. You're not changing mine. What I would encourage you to do, however, is to use stars as part of the evaluation process. You look at stars and the rankings, but then look also at the offer list and look at who's recruiting him. And it's not just the school, but like what schools that are known for producing players at that position. So, for example, if there's an offensive lineman from Illinois that Iowa wants, you look at him because Kirk Ferentz has a habit of taking these kind of kids, right, and finding them and turning them into studs, right? But if I was recruiting a wide receiver from Illinois, I wouldn't care. So it's not always just, I mean, if Alabama's recruiting kid in any position, the kid can play, right? I mean, that's the reality. Same with Ohio State. But with some of these other schools, I would look at that. So I would also look at offer list as part of your evaluation for what this kid is. But I think Mike is right. I think this is a kid that's got some potential to be this isn't a depth pickup, Ryan. This isn't a kid they just got to, we just need some bodies at linebacker, and this kid fills that need.
Yeah, and I mean, we keep talking about how Notre Dame's done over the last couple of cycles, right? Bringing in linebacker recruiting, and you have guys on the staff that clearly do know what good linebackers look like, right? You have Marcus Freeman. I know James Laurinaitis is in a capacity now. Like, you have guys that can see linebacker talent. So I would just trust the staff on this one. They wanted Zinter. They wanted him in the class. This wasn't just we're striking on everybody, let's take him. Like, they wanted him a part of this class. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. John A1 with a question. Here we go. This is for you, Ryan. I think this is right up your wheelhouse. What are the different traits in a safety prospect that would project them to either the free safety or, actually he's saying field safety versus boundary safety?
Sure. Yeah. All right. So field safety, which would be most closely associated to a free safety, because you're going to be working in a lot more space, right? Those guys need to cover a lot more ground. They need to be a little more of a rangy type player because they are going to be covering a lot more space, a little bit more flexibility in that regard. Boundary, or if you're going to quantify it as a strong safety, they're a little more of a thicker body type, not necessarily longer, but a thicker body type that is going to be involved more heavily in the run. They're going to do things in a lot of times, because a lot of teams rotate, right? They're going to rotate down. They're going to play more towards the line of scrimmage. They're just going to have more runs responsibilities in general. So field safety or free safety are guys that are your true coverage safety, while the boundary or strong safety are guys that are going to be playing more towards the line of scrimmage and doing things more in the box.
Now, that's the traditional sense of it. I think what Notre Dame is looking for, and Ryan, we've talked about this on the show, is they want guys that can kind of play both.
Interchangeable.
Yes, exactly. Because against a lot of the tempo teams, the air raid teams, for example, look at the Oklahoma State game. You need to have the ability to just line up and play left and right to where you're not rotating field boundary. And if you're playing left and right, and to Ryan's point, you've got a guy that's let's say you have because like you could also say, well, look, in certain defenses, a boundary safety is a guy that rolls to the middle a lot. Right. So you need a guy that can play center field. He needs to play alley, but center field. Notre Dame's is a little bit different than that. They kind of both will roll to the middle. And the field safety a lot of times is in the last couple of years has done more of that. Right. But the point is, if you get in a situation where a team's going tempo and you can't switch sides, and you have a field or boundary that's only good at like one part of that, then there's going to be times when you're going to get him in a matchup that he's just like you're going to exploit. And teams know this. If we're going tempo and we do this, we know we're coming right back with this because we've got that guy in the matchup that we like. And that's why so much of what Notre Dame is trying to do is they want corners and safeties that aren't just field boundary. They want guys that can do everything, because then that allows you to play left-right. And there's merit to left-right corner play. I think there's merit to field boundary. It's just about what you're most comfortable with. But I definitely feel like ideally you want a guy that can do both.
Sure.
But Ryan's answer was spot on in regards to the difference between the two. It's just I'm just pointing out that ideally, and I think you'll attest to this, right? The days of Steve Atwater, one position, and Dennis Smith at another, and they're just kind of that's who they are. Yeah. That still exists, but that's not the ideal like it used to be. Now you kind of want interchangeable guys.
And I was going to say the trend, especially on the NFL level speaking, is you're playing a lot more too high looks, right? So that is the definition of interchangeable. You're not rotating the strong safety down a ton anymore. You're playing that too high because there's just such a threat of that vertical passing game now, just the passing game in general. You need those guys that can kind of do a little bit of both, to your point.
Right. And so then he asked this. So Peyton Bowen is more of a field safety and Adon Schuler is more of a boundary safety. And to his world, are they? Yeah. So you want to answer that last part? Are they both capable of playing both?
Yeah. So to the question, the first part, yes, they in an ideal world. Are they both capable of playing both? Yes, absolutely. I would say so. Peyton is definitely the more gifted coverage guy, right? Has a little more range on the back end. But if you get Schuler in the situation where if you're rotating, you get him to the middle of the field, he's not going to kill you. Like he can sit back there and he can still make some plays. So there is some interchangeableness to them. Yes, and especially. I think that it gives you a lot of potential, right? Because we're even seeing now more college teams go to 3 safety looks and do all different types of things on the back end. But yes, to answer your question, I do think that they both are capable of doing things in spurts. But I would say Peyton is obviously still the preferred free safety in that scenario.
Here's a question from Keith Wiegand. Is Zinter comparable to Nolan Ziegler?
Not in my opinion. I think of Ziegler more as a space player, right? Like they're both long, but I think of Ziegler a little more comparable to almost like a safety, right? Like a little more of a hybrid type of outlook on him. Zinter, I think of as a true inside guy, and I know he's been asked to do things in space, which I think is a nice projection to him being, more than just your traditional downhill Mike. Like I think he could do a little bit more than that. But I would say Ziegler is just more that natural rover safety hybrid type of guy that's going to play a lot more from depth.
I think the thing you said at the beginning was the best part of all that. I mean, it was all great, but the space part.
Yeah.
Nolan is a space guy. Preston is more of a box guy.
Yes.
And I think you nailed that part. Absolutely. John Zabrowski asked, Brian, does Zinter's scholarship take a scholarship away from anyone offered so far in the 2023 class? The Todd Bowles kid, the Jeremiah Trotter's kid. I will say, yes, Phil Picciotti, I don't think is a take anymore because of this. I would assume that Jeremiah Trotter is no longer going to be a guy they push for because I see
Josiah
because
Trotter.
I see him as a more of a Mike. But again, Notre Dame views Zinter as potentially being a will. So if there was a Mike that they thought was just a stud, if Anthony Hill wants to come and you view him as a Mike, you're taking Anthony Hill, right? But I think some of the other guys that are more on Zinter's level, I personally think Zinter's a better prospect than Josiah Trotter. I do. And we broke down the Picciotti thing earlier. Todd Bowles' son is not a Mike, in my opinion. Like not a traditional Mike anyway. He's more of a will. I would even say maybe even a rover will type of guy. Definitely has a rover body type. He might be more of a will in how he plays, but it does not. It's Troy, correct? Isn't it Troy?
Troy Bowles, yep.
Right. It doesn't affect him. It doesn't affect Anthony Hill. It doesn't affect Jaden Osbury. It doesn't affect guys like that. Not just because they're highly ranked. It's just part of it. But also, a lot of those guys can play will, and that's part of it too. Because again, Drake Bowen can play rover. So you're not turning down one of the dudes. I just don't think Picciotti fits that mold. I don't think Trotter fits that mold. There's a couple other linebackers on the board that you say, this guy's probably not going to be in the class now because they took Zinter. But it's not anyone that you'd be like, what? You're not taking that guy? Like, I don't know if you're going to, like, to me, I don't know if Jordan Hall, I don't know if that's a guy that I would necessarily continue looking at. Right.
Yeah, I was going to say Jordan Hall is another example. Like those guys are true Mikes, I don't want to, I will say like they're Mike only type of players, right? Like they're not, there's no interchangeableness to them.
Right.
The staff views Preston Zinter as a Mike, but also can play will. You're going to need guys that can kind of do a little bit of both in how it's kind of moving.
Right. It doesn't impact. I'll just go down the list. It doesn't impact Jaden Osbury. It doesn't impact Troy Bowles. It doesn't impact Nicholas Harbor. It doesn't impact Anthony Hill. It doesn't impact Samuel Mpemba. And it doesn't impact, I would say, if Tamir Robinson checks out medically in the next several months, it wouldn't impact him. But I think he's kind of on the back burner now as they kind of see. He had a really bad knee injury in October. And I think that's kind of raised some red flags. So I don't know if he's a guy they're pushing as hard for now as they were a few months ago. Because they really liked him a lot. It's just, when you're recruiting some really good players, that's the kind of thing that can kind of cause you to fall on the back burner with those guys. So and now the thing too about Zinter too is because we just took some guys off the board. Trey Edwards was a kid that was on the board for a while, although this current staff wasn't really pushing hard for him. That's the kid out in California. He's not even. I mean, if there was any thought of going after him before, you're not now. But what this also does, because there's some guys off the board, that means Marcus Freeman and whoever becomes the linebackers coach can now start looking at, okay, we've narrowed our board, so we are going to spend a whole lot more attention on this smaller group of players, which I don't think that hurts at all. No. Truman DeMel asks, Ryan, how big is it for the running back room to have Dylan McCullough, and also the fact he turned down the New York Giants?
Well, I mean, we talked a little bit about the Giants layer to it, right? It's obviously he wants to be in Notre Dame, which is fantastic. To the direct question, though, is from a coaching perspective, I am excited about Coach McCullough, to say the least, because when you just look at his resume, whether it's working at Indiana with Jordan Howard and what was the other kid that came out of there that was really good?
Tevin Coleman.
Tevin Coleman.
Yeah.
Yep. So whether it's working with them or the year where he was with Ronald Jones, that first year where the kid just exploded onto the scene, right? Like he was a good player before he got there, but McCullough took his game to a completely different level. And then obviously the NFL layer, I think he's a really good running back coach. And and I have a piece about just kind of his recruiting chops and recruiting background a little bit. And I will say he's regarded as a good recruiter. There is obviously some things where it's like, you're recruiting at Indiana, right? Like there's just some kids that you're not going to be able to attract, but he has a good reputation as a recruiter. But the most thing that I'm really excited about is the fact that he has a great track record with developing running backs. He has done that at a high level, to say the least. And he spent some time at the next level. He's got a Super Bowl ring as well, which won't hurt the recruiting facets of everything as well. Yeah.
If it wasn't for Brady, he'd have 2 Super Bowl rings.
Right now. So yeah. So I'm excited about him as a coach and as the reputation as a recruiter. I think it's a great fit.
I think it was going to be hard to get a coach that matched Lance Taylor as a running backs coach. And they did that, in my opinion. I mean, and maybe better. I think one difference in the two is Lance brought more of an all-around deal. Dylan is a running backs coach, and I'm saying that in a complimentary fashion. Like he is a guy that is going to be able to coach that position at a very high level. And from the running back standpoint, running back pass pro, doesn't mean if the guy's smart enough to coach in the NFL, he's smart enough to teach running backs how to run routes and different things like that. But it's more of he is a pure running backs coach. He's coached running backs his whole career. Or Lance Taylor was kind of a back and forth in running backs and receivers. And Dylan played running back where Lance was a receiver. So again, it's about Lance learned running back. Dylan lives running back. And I think that helps too. And I think the biggest difference, as Ryan pointed to, is going to be on the recruiting trail. I mean, Lance Taylor was a really good football coach. I don't know how much you can improve him as a coach. There's a lot of room for improvement from Lance as a recruiter. He was a solid recruiter, but he wasn't a great recruiter, and he didn't grind. And I think Coach McCullough is gonna do that. There's no doubt. Here's some interesting stuff as we get close to the end, Ryan. Lil Zub asks, your thoughts on it's a 2-part question. Your thoughts on the green jerseys. I feel like BK held back from using them. Will Freeman bring back the green jerseys more? Second part of it was just need to wear the green jerseys they show off with recruits. They have them. Why not wear them more? I'll let you go. I'll let you take first crack at this.
Man, I feel like I'm going to get kicked out of this channel. I don't like the green jerseys. I just don't like the look of them. I'm not like a green person much in general, just as like the number one primary color. Like it's just not my bag. I do think I like that they pop, if they once in a blue moon for sure, for just kind of the effect of it, but I wouldn't say more. Like I think it's enough green. And I know there's a lot of people that really love those green jerseys, just not my style, I guess.
So I'm going to tell you what I think they should do for jerseys, and tell me what you think. We talked about this in the chat recently. Now, number one, I would go to the pants that they used in 2019 against BC. I'd get rid of mustard and I'd go to those gold pants. I thought those look great with the helmets. I would keep the the home uniforms, the rest of it the same. What I would do is I'd take the green gloves and cleats that they wore in the Cotton Bowl in 2018, and I would make those like my normal cleat and gloves. Because I'm like you, like with the exception of like green, I don't think green is a great complementary color as like a number 2 with anything other than like white or yellow. Like it doesn't work well as a main color with a lot. And I don't like the green and gold. I don't love that when the green's like there. The reason I like the 2015 uniforms of BC so much at Fenway was because it was all green. It was like green was the dominant color. And I think that plays well, but that's not what you want to do all the time. That's more of a change up for the Shamrock game. Sure. So I do like having a little bit of green, obviously, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's more of a complementary color. So that's why I say, like, for home games, make the gloves and the cleats green. I think that would pop. I think that would pop big time. And then for the road games is when I would wear green jerseys. I wouldn't have the numbers be green for road games. That's the change I would make. I'd have green numbers with gold outline. And that would just be my normal road uniform, as opposed to right now it's just white with it's just gold and blue. I would make it gold and green. I think that those are the changes that I would make in regards to making green more of a permanent fixture of what they do. And if they're going to go green in a Shamrock game, that's fine. I think the jerseys they show off for recruits are pretty cool to show off the recruits. I don't think it's a thing where I'm like, oh, they got to wear those jerseys. I'm with you. I don't love the green jerseys. I think they're cool, but like, oh, hey, fun, for the Army game in 06, they brought out green jerseys. Like, oh, that's fun. But like, I would make green more of a normal part of the complementary stuff, I would do that more than I would make it as a whole jersey color. That's
like
just
the primary. Yeah.
Well,
like the Irish breakdown thing, for instance, right? Like we got the blue as the primary for everything, right? And then we got the green that pops, like you're saying, on top of like the white and just a little bit of gold. Like for me, green is a good secondary color, right? Like, but I just just too much. I don't know. I don't know if it's just watching the Philadelphia Eagles play too much. Like it's just too much green sometimes. Just too much.
I get it. All right. Jared Rhodes. Brian, thanks a lot for the tweet about Reacher. I've been tired all week after not being able to shut it off. Any other recommendations? You have good taste. Thank you for that, Jared. I will, if I ever come across a series that I like, I'll send it out. I personally like the Jack Ryan one. If you haven't watched that, I know some people like with the Jack Ryan series. That's with John Krasinski. Isn't his name correct? John Krasinski, the guy from The Office. Yes. I didn't think I was going to like it because I think he's funny, right? The only thing I've ever really seen him in, like I haven't seen 13 Hours yet. The only thing I've ever seen him in is like comedy. So I saw him in The Office, and then he was in It's Complicated, which I think is a hilarious movie. You ever seen that, Ryan? With Meryl Streep and Alec Baldwin.
I haven't. He was also in the was A Quiet Place, right?
I never saw those. Yeah, with his wife.
The first one was pretty good. I mean, obviously it's they're quiet majority of the movie, so it's like the acting dynamics, but it was a good movie. I thought he was good in it.
Yeah. But I've only ever really seen him in comedy, so I was not thinking I was going to like him, and I did. I thought he was really good as Jack Ryan, and I rather enjoyed the season 1 and season 2 of Jack Ryan. Some people didn't. I did. I enjoyed it. So. If you haven't watched that, Jared, I would watch that. And if more come along, I'll let you know. I was excited that they just announced the other day that Reacher is going to have a second season. So I'm fired up about that. Because like the reason I didn't number one, I've never bought Tom Cruise as like pardon my language, but like a badass. I just have never I'm like, he's like this little fella. And, like the only movie he was ever kind of that type of character that I actually enjoyed was The Night and Day, because it was a comedy. It was like it was funny. I don't know if you ever seen that, but like I didn't. And my mom had told me about the books because she had read the books, and like she's like described Reacher, and he's like this big giant guy, and I'm like, it's not Tom Cruise. Like he's not even big compared to like average sized ladies. You know what I mean? Like he's a little fella, and so. When I saw that they were coming out with like a completely redoing the character, and they were keeping it as true to the point as the books, I was like, okay, that makes sense. I have never watched it, but my parents, speaking of Amazon Prime, my parents watch Bosch. They love it. It's another like detective-y cop kind of thing. I've never seen it, but they like that a lot. So maybe give that a whirl. But and somebody brought up Blue Mountain State the other day because it's what and I watched a couple episodes and I'm like, this is terrible. Like this is like it was awful. It's like awful. It's like a wannabe football Van Wilder thing. It was highly inappropriate. I didn't like it at all, to be completely honest with you. But I gave it a shot and I was like, this is so bad. But it is what it is. Hunter Land with the kid out of Iowa. That'd be Caden Proctor, the 2023 offensive lineman. Putting Notre Dame in his top list. Is Notre Dame still wanting him? You guys haven't mentioned him in a while. There will always be kids that put Notre Dame in their top group, even though Notre Dame's not a real option. Notre Dame is not a real option for Caden Proctor. when Notre Dame staff went out on the road recently with Heastant, they did not go see Caden Proctor. I think that should tell you everything you need to know. He's a good kid and all that, but it's not a fit. It's not going to work. So they were on him for a while. They're not on him now. I don't expect him to be a guy that they are moving for down the road. Keith Wiegand, 2 guys I want is Jaden Greathouse and Malik Muhammad, both difference makers. Ryan will second that comment. You love Jaden Greathouse, Ryan.
I do, man. I do. I like Malik Muhammad a lot, too. I think it would be a great pairing potentially with Justin Wright if Notre Dame is able to land Malik Muhammad at cornerback. But I had actually not watched Jaden Greathouse until a few days ago. And, man, he might be my favorite wide receiver I've watched so far in the 2023 cycle. The kid is incredibly nuanced for a 2023 kid. Like releases, route running, physicality. There's a lot to like about Jaden, and he's also listed at like 6'2", 215, 220, somewhere in that ballpark. So he's a big body who runs good routes, and his release package is really nice too. He gets off the line of scrimmage and he mixes things up, and he's just a very advanced wide receiver, and I really do like Jaden a lot.
Yeah, and we were trying to think of comps for him, and like a shorter version of Michael Floyd was one at one point in time. Like there's some Cooper Kupp to his game a little bit. Like he's a hard guy to comp because he's got that weird body type. Like 6'1", 215. He's a very advanced player. My only question about him was how much better is he going to get? That'd be my only question. That you'd want to watch more film and evaluate as a coach to say, hey, is he going to get better? And that doesn't always mean you don't bring a kid in. It's if you need a receiver to play right away, that's your dude. Other than Cardinal Tate, I don't know if there's another receiver on the board right now that has as much show up on day one and be ready to play as Jaden Greathouse. And Notre Dame's going to need a guy like that. I mean, if we're being honest, and they're going to lose a lot of dudes, they're going to need some guys that come in and play right away. Malik Muhammad, though, for me, is a no-brainer.
Yeah, Malik Muhammad's a no-brainer. Jaden Greathouse, though, I think would be a great get for Notre Dame at wide receiver, just because if you watch the state title game where they actually went against Denton Geyer, right, with Peyton Bowen and Jackson Arnold and all those dudes, Ryan Yates.
Destroyed Ryan Yates in that game.
7 receptions for like 230 something and 3 touchdowns. Just an absurd game. So he's a good player, man. Good player.
Yeah, he absolutely destroyed Ryan Yates. Like I felt bad for him. I felt really bad for him. It was pretty bad. But yeah, the other thing too, Ryan, that we haven't talked about, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we have our show about recruiting areas.
Yeah.
If Notre Dame could start having a legitimate presence in Texas, meaning they're getting a couple kids a year from Texas that are top players, that's almost reason alone to bring them in. And if there's some scenario in which Notre Dame could land Peyton Bowen, Malik Muhammad, and Jaden Greathouse out of the state of Texas in the 2020
in one cycle,
holy moly! Because as we've said before, that opens up the gateway. Like as Georgia kids have come to Notre Dame and been successful, more Georgia kids are willing to come to Notre Dame. It's just the reality of it. And if they could somehow pull that off, and it's going to be very difficult. I'm just hoping to get one of those 3. You know what I mean? Like, keep Peyton Bowen in the class. But if they could get 2 to 3 of those guys, it just makes it easier to go out in there and do the same thing in 2024. And, and that would be huge. And I think that is going to be it. We'll leave with Bill Emery to wrap up. We're going to go back to the beginning. Bill Emery says, great pickup of Preston Zinter. The Irish linebacker room is going to be loaded. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. So that's going to do it for today's show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, share. We are going to have a show tomorrow at 12:30. Sean Davis and I are going to get together, and we're going to have a discussion. We're going to kind of Lucky Lefty podcast brought up something the other day that Sean asked me about, and it's does Notre Dame have a star problem? And it kind of revolves around rankings. And so I have a very strong opinion on that. Absolutely do. And so we're going to have a show tomorrow. Probably around 1 o'clock is probably when we'll do it. So that's why you hit the notification bell so you know when we go it. We're going to have several different recruiting shows. Ryan, Sean, and I had a chat the other day kind of looking at our podcast schedule. We have some really fun recruiting stuff that we're going to do here over the next week or two. So definitely want to check that out. That's why you need to hit the like, and especially why you need to subscribe, and even more so why you hit the notification bell so you know when we're going to do shows. And as my man Mace AK says, join the message board. $4.99 a month or $49.99 for a year. They have all the intel that we get, tons of great Notre Dame discussion. And so you want to check that out at boards@irishbreakdown.com. So thank you for joining us on this /commitment/mailbag podcast. It was a lot of fun. Everybody, thank you all for being with us. Ryan, thank you for joining us. And of course, I'm glad that Vince was on the show with us. It was a lot of fun. And thank you all for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.